minutes while we try to get the laptops working. So thank you so much for your patience. that means we're ready. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Commissioners, fellow commissioners, and our guests here tonight. This is the Public Ethics Commission's transparency hearing, which we are hosting in partnership with Open Oakland. My name is Aspen Baker. I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission and the Chair of the Subcommittee on Access to Public Records. I am seated beside two of my fellow subcommittee members, Commissioner Benjamin Kimberly and actually Commissioner Eddie Tejeda. We are also joined by our esteemed chair of the Public Ethics Commission, Lloyd Farnham, and our other commissioners. So we are very happy to be here, and we're going to also enjoy having our executive director, Whitney Barizotto, working with me up here because we have many moving parts that we are trying to experiment with tonight and a lot of different technologies. So we assume it's going to go smashingly. Our subcommittee organized this event as part of its work reviewing the accessibility of city information and the openness of city government. Our goal tonight is to engage in authentic, solutions-oriented dialogue about transparency in Oakland. We want to know what we're doing right, what needs work, and what innovations we might want for the city moving forward. This is happening at a very powerful and interesting moment for transparency and public records. Here in the city, Oakland officials have made a number of new steps to promote transparency, such as the launch of the Open Data Platform, the fact that we are now a Code for America city with the fellowship, and there was a passage of legislation requiring e-filing of campaign finance data in City Hall. Additionally, we have really strong community partnership here in Oakland, such as Open Oakland, City Camp Oakland, and Open Budget Oakland, some of which the members and volunteers are here with us tonight, who we're very happy to have. And then our own Public Ethics Commission has taken proactive steps to help the city improve public records access for the public, and we're turning our own commission website into a hub of information about the transparency work that is happening. So we initiated this transparency project to assess government transparency, hear about innovations that are happening outside of Oakland that we can learn from, and use that to outline a vision for how we want to move forward here. This hearing, as you might have come to understand, is taking place amid a statewide discussion about the California Public Records Act as part of a budget discussion in Sacramento. So we certainly did not anticipate the timing of that debate, but it certainly highlights the importance of transparency at this moment. The benefit that Oakland has that might be unusual for other cities is that we have our own Sunshine Ordinance, which incorporates the entire Public Records Act, along with stricter public records and open meeting requirements. So we are eager to hear from all of our speakers tonight, some of whom have traveled across the country to be with us because they have heard about what is happening in Oakland. And what we can be doing. But we also want to hear from all of you. And we are trying out a variety of new public participation tools. And so that is one of the things that we know is important for government and engagement in government moving forward, is all of the different ways that people can engage and give feedback. So we're going to try out some of those tonight with our own meeting, and I'm going to hand this over to our executive director to tell you a little bit more about how it's going to work.
Thank you. Thank you. In the spirit of innovation and public engagement, we have a number of options, and I do have a confession to make. When I came to the city last year, I actually personally wanted to learn about better technology that could help make government more efficient. That was one of my personal goals. And I had no idea of the magnitude of resources and commitment in Oakland before I arrived. And so we are extremely fortunate to have both the commitment and also just the amazing resources here in Oakland to be doing a lot of very interesting work around open government. So on that note, we have an array of options. If you want to put up the slides. Are they not working? K-Talk, is it possible to queue up the slides?
Innovation and progress.
So basically, don't think that if you're not in the room, you can't engage. We have a lot of options for people to be watching from home, and we'll do our best to incorporate your comments. So I'll go through a couple of ways that you can engage. And I'll tell you, I received a call this morning from an Oakland resident named Karen who asked, how can I participate tonight? She wanted to express her concern about not being able to see financial information for the Oakland Zoo, for example. She also said she had trouble accessing our city information through the phone number that we had on our agenda. So these are things we need to hear. If it's not working, we need to hear about that. But starting with the first way, you can let us know. Text is in. This is live now. If you have a cell phone, you can pull it out and text. You want to text a letter grade our transparency for Oakland, A through F. And it'll prompt you through that process with a couple of follow-up questions that I hope you'll participate in. We really want to get feedback this way. And also, what we'll do is, throughout the hearing, try and funnel some of the information coming in through text is in, and Adam Stiles from Open Oakland is our monitor here in the front row to be doing that. We also have View Act, where viewers can watch at home online and comment through a couple of buttons, and also make comments on the side. And that is available to us through our View Act folks over here on the dais, who are both videotaping live View Act comments coming in as well. And I'll just say, although it's up on the screen, you can access View Act through our webpage. So if you go to our homepage, and you can do that by Googling from home, or go to oaklandnet.com/PEC, click on Transparency Project, it's an orange box, and then click on View Act when you get to that page. You can live stream there. Twitter, we have a Twitter hashtag, PECNTG, and we will funnel comments as well through that process. And Sheila Dugan from Code for America in the front row, also sitting next to Adam Stiles, is going to be monitoring our Twitter. Engage Open will be available ongoing after the hearing. We also have questions there about grading transparency, and you can participate that way. And of course, the old-fashioned comment card. So we have both speaker cards at the back table as well as blank cards, where if you'd rather just write down your question or comment, this will be particularly helpful as we go through our speakers, as we'll have public comment at the beginning and also at the very end of tonight's discussion. But if you want to ask a question of one of the speakers, feel free to fill out one of those blank comment cards, and you can either make a comment or a question and hand those to Lauren here in the front row, and she will funnel those up to us as well, and we can read those out loud. Again, we'll do our best to weave the comments in throughout the discussion, and we'll try and pause at the end of each speaker to allow for some of that process to occur. And please don't disappoint us. Engage. We have a lot of fun things going on, so we hope that you say something.
Great, thank you. So we're obviously very excited for the chance to really try these out, so we hope that you will try them out with us. Our goal is to have an effective and efficient meeting here tonight that allows for people to have the opportunity to engage in all of these different ways. And I want to be clear that there's no action that will be taken at this meeting. So this is a hearing where we have the chance to hear from all of you and our speakers. At another time, our subcommittee will come together to discuss everything that we learned through this process, and we'll draft recommendations for the full commission to consider at a future commission meeting. And we look forward to putting our heads together with you to come up with a vision and a roadmap for where we're headed. But to start off, we want to show a very short video about that was revealed with the launch of the International Open Government Partnership in 2011. I think it gives us a really good idea about what is possible with open government. So we're going to watch a short video. We're going to try one more time. K-Talk, can you please switch from the slides to the video, please? I said we were going to try one more time, but I really meant two more times.
Meanwhile, are there any public comment cards, speaker cards that people want to submit for initial public comment?
Great, now we know what we're doing. Thanks again. So I want to acknowledge that we have Mayor Jean Kwan with us tonight, as well as City Administrator Deanna Santana. So we're very happy that they've been able to join us. We're going to move into open forum before we get into our main agenda item, which is all our speakers. I believe that we have 5 speaker cards tonight, and we will be allocating, does that mean we have one more coming? So we will have 6 speaker cards, which means we're going to allocate 2 minutes for every speaker. We will have open forum again, or our public comment, at the end of all of our speakers. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Barazota.
First speaker is David Cruz.
Good evening, Commissioners. David Cruz. I'm actually with the Oakland Department of Technology. I come here representing, unfortunately, Senator Leland Yee, who could not make it to the meeting at the very last moment. He was very excited to make the meeting, but unfortunately, the Senate called a last-minute session yesterday related to today's budget hearing. So he has a prepared statement that he would like read to you and submitted to you for record, and hopefully you can come at a later date. So beginning with this, thank you to the Public Ethics Commission and the Oakland community for allowing me the opportunity to share my thoughts this evening. I wish I could have been here in person, but unfortunately a late floor session was called in the Senate today, leaving me unable to join you. I've spent years trying to keep government in our state open and accountable, as well as finding ways to utilize modern technology to help keep people informed as to what their government is doing. Most recently, I cast a vote against Assembly Bill 76, which would have undermined the California Public Records Act, making it far more difficult for the public and the press to obtain documents affecting what should be public business. While it was troubling that this measure made it as far as it did, it was quite heartening to see the quick response, first in terms of the public demanding the CPRA be restored, and then by the legislative leadership and the governor to find a means of preserving this important policy now and in the future. There's still a great deal left to do in the quest to make government more accessible. Unfortunately, there is little forward inertia in Sacramento to push this technological advancement. Last year, my Senate Bill 1002 would have required all digital copies of public documents to be searchable. Sadly, this relatively easy fix did not receive the governor's signature. While those of us in Sacramento continue to tilt at windmills, there is much work to be done by the inclined to push transparency from the bottom up. It's written by the Senator. Open Oakland offers numerous websites and apps that make knowing and understanding what government is up to easy. A few minutes on Councilmatic shows how much more effective most city government websites could be. Even something as simple as the ability to search by issue area puts it miles ahead of most of what's out there. These services will help to keep our government ahead of our curve and to strengthen the communication between elected officials and who they govern. Just as social media has dramatically changed how we communicate. It's okay if I continue? Very, very, very little left. Just as social media has dramatically changed how we communicate, innovation in how we share information about the actions of governments can dramatically change how our democracy functions. I commend the City of Oakland for its commitment to transparency and for holding such events as this one in order to find new ways to improve communication and access. Open government policies are vital because they help everyone, from journalists to everyday citizens, to be vigilant for waste, fraud, and abuse. But more than that, they protect the fundamental right to know what our government is up to. An electorate that is not aware of their government's activities is an electorate ill-equipped to elect leaders qualified to deal with the problems we face. Sincerely, Senator Leland Yee. So I submit this to you. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Rob Kentz.
Good evening, Commission members. My name is Rob Kentz. The first thing I want to leave with you is copies of the 1997-1998 grand jury report that involved the Oakland Campaign Reform Act. It's no longer available online. There's some hard copies here for the Commission. And it's just to point out that while some of the things did get implemented that the grand jury recommended, not all of them did. And we're still living with some of those problems. So there's a lot of work yet to be done from 1998, let alone from 2013. I just have a question. How many members of the Public Ethics Commission have ever made a Public Records Act request? One. Let me tell you, I've made Public Records Act requests to the state, the county, a number of cities, a number of agencies. Oakland is the worst, period. Without a doubt. You go to make a Public Records Act request, you do the dance. The problem in Oakland, they don't do the dance. You understand that there's going to be things kind of hidden and there's a whole game to it. In Oakland, they just destroy them. We have a mayor that left office and destroyed all his records in 2007. We have city council members that destroy emails on a regular basis. And you go to get them and they go, we don't have those. That's the problem you're doing. That's the problem with transparency in the city. I've had the situation of seeing a developer put a letter on the table in the planning department and being refused a copy of that. I have yet to see that. That was 6 years ago. That's what a Public Records Act request. That's what transparency is. Transparency isn't what can I get on the website. Transparency is getting something when you want it, when you need it. There was a thing here about the records, the financial records of the Oakland Zoo. I made a public record request for that last September. You know what I found out? It's required in their contract with the city. They've never provided them for years and years and years. That's why nobody can get those records. The city should be throwing the zoo out on their head and not giving them a cent of more money because they're in violation of their contract.
Please wrap it up. Thank you.
And finally, I'm going to leave you a copy of the City of Vallejo Municipal Code, Section 2.0.140. Willful failure shall be official misconduct. The knowing, willful, and deliberate failure of any elected official, department director, or other managerial city employee to discharge any duties imposed by the Ralph M. Brown Act, the California Public Record Act, or this chapter shall be deemed official misconduct. An elected official found guilty of such misconduct shall be removed from office in the manner prescribed by law.
Thank you, guys.
That's what Oakland needs. Thank you.
Next speaker, Max Alstead. Max Alstead.
Hi, I want to piggyback on some of the things that Ralph said. On the other hand, I do believe that transparency does include making records available on the website. I think that we're looking at a difference here between transparency and accountability and consequences. And the we are making very clear progress on transparency. I've been watching people make progress on transparency. I've been watching the city be open to new technological ideas about transparency, but without accountability, it's absolutely meaningless. For instance, I'm willing to bet anybody in this room, I don't know, about $200-300 to your favorite charity that Nancy O'Malley will not be filing charges against Desmond Brooks. Guarantee it. It's not going to happen. Part of the reason that this is happening is because we have a one-party city and a one-party county, and so what we need is an extra-partisan, non-partisan system for actually enacting accountability, and you are it. You are potentially it. You aren't it yet. I was going to ask the whole Ethics Commission question. Who here served on the Ethics Commission the longest? How many times have you seen this many people in an Ethics Commission meeting? Ever before? So what we're looking at here, this is a constituency. This is a group that needs to be organized and needs to spread its own concerns about transparency and consequences. Consequences. Mr. Cans just said that they destroy emails that they don't want to give to you. I know for a fact that sometimes they just don't give them to you. I know this from insider information, from actually having that work out to my advantage once, that a council member would have given a records request for an email that would have not looked good for me, and he just didn't give it up, and he said he didn't have it, and no consequences. We need consequences.
Thank you.
Jim Dexter.
Jim Dexter, District 4. I really appreciate the opportunity to watch this meeting tonight. And I want to share with you that in being tangentially aware of what's going on in the city of Oakland, I think that transparency has vastly improved over the past couple of years. I think that our mayor, Jean Kwong, and our city administrator, Deanna Santana, have done a fabulous job of opening up some very strong armed doors and allow the public to actually see what's going on behind those doors. It's really quite nice. So that's a real strong message that you should be hearing. At the same time, you should be hearing that there are closed doors. I want to mention just two of them. One is our Oakland Police Department. I have been asking for over 6 years for data on the problem-solving officer assignments and the time they spend on the beat. That information has never been forthcoming, ever. So when we talk about transparency, we talk about not only the ability to open the doors, but the willingness of the public servants to put the data inside the room so that you can see it when the door is open.
30 seconds.
The second thing, thank you. The second thing is our Public Works Department. We've had a vast improvement in the interaction between the public and the Public Works Department through the Public Works call center number. This has really improved the situation between public and Public Works. However, that system has deep flaws in it, and I'll mention one in my 10 seconds left, and that is that Public Works can close a call, a tracked call, without contacting the originator of the call and without notice to the originator of the call. And that has caused huge problems. So I've had individual items that have been sent in that have gone through 7 iterations of reopening. And when you see the stats for that kind of closure and opening, you see that Public Works has effectively closed 7 items. Even though it's the same item over and over and over again.
Next speaker is Troy Massey. I apologize, I'm a terrible timekeeper, but I'm trying. Troy Massey?
Sure, hold on. Hello, citizens of Oakland. How are we doing tonight? Hello, Council. My name is Troy Massey. I'm Communications Coordinator with the Community Democracy Project, who believes that citizens deserve more than 2 minutes on the mic, and that government needs to be accountable, so that we become the government by putting people in charge of the budgeting process. You can check us out at communitydemocracyproject.org and read about our initiative to change the city charter of Oakland. I'm also an independent researcher, and I was wondering, what is keeping the city of Oakland from digitizing all records by purchasing an industrial scanner and doing it themselves, or at least by hiring a records management company to organize the records that many organizations specialize in? 2, who has access to the databases in each department, and when will these people standardize processes and organize a hierarchical master list so we can review all records? 3, who will be bottom-lining the transparency actions of the city of Oakland? Will it be this commission? Thank you.
Next is Esther Goolsby, our final speaker.
Hello everybody. I'm Esther Goolsby, and basically I wanted to say about this. Before I came, I didn't know that it was actually the Public Ethics Commission, but I'm glad it is, especially about transparency and openness. I think what it is that we need the citizens to get the information and have a better way for it to be. Yeah, the technology, the Twitter, all that. And by the way, I'm from District 7. So I know for a fact that we're out of it. And unless we're in it, we're really out of it because we don't have any outreach, no outlet. Yeah, the mayor came over there. hardly anybody knew about it. So I think with this, somewhere or another we need to get some better type of advertising. The advertising to get the people that really need Oakland's help and really needs Oakland to be transparent and see that the city can work for us. So at the same time, we can work for the city. And a lot of people need the education part, and we're getting cut out over there. In District 7, District 6, District 5, we're shut out. And it's mainly because we don't know about it. So all I'm asking is if we can get some better type of education for all of Oakland, and especially District 7, because that's my district. Yeah, that's transparent already. Basically, that's what I'm saying. I think it's really unfair that a lot of these meetings, people have a lot of stuff to say, whether they be yelling at you or actually speaking to you properly, whatever, so you can hear it and understand that we need this right in Oakland too.
Thank you all very much. So now we're going to move to our scheduled speakers for the evening. We will hear from all of them, and if there's any remaining public comment at the end, there'll be time there. What we're going to try to do is, if we're seeing some comments come in through all the different engagement tools that Ms. Vero spoke about, we'll have a chance to have those get incorporated into our discussion. So each speaker will talk, but commissioners will have a chance to ask a few questions. We'll hear what's happening out in the Twitter sphere, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So Whitney, can you introduce our speaker?
Yes, our first speaker is Tim O'Reilly. He's the founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media, Inc., thought by many to be the best computer book publisher in the world. He also hosts conferences on technology topics, including the O'Reilly Open Source Convention, the Web 2.0 Summit, Strata, the Business of Data, and many others. In 2009, Mr. O'Reilly published Government as a Platform, which discussed open government, collaboration, transparency, and participation in practice. Welcome, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks very much for having me. By the way, is there power up here? Because my laptop is going to die without somebody should record that.
And K-Talk, do we need to queue up the slides?
Yeah, I can get there. Oh, get back to the slides. Yeah,
And could you also make sure to speak into the mic so that people from home?
I just wanted to say hi to all of you. And we'll be talking back to you, but I know you get to see me up there. I think. I know you don't, because I'm going to have slides. All right. So I have been, so I'm going to try to face this way so I can address both the audience and the commission. First of all, I should say I'm a recent addition to being an Oakland resident. I've been here about 2 years, and I'm not deeply enmeshed in the local politics. I've spent my career as a business person and a technology activist, not a political activist, but a technology activist. And I just wanted to say, in response to the public comments that I heard, I've watched a lot of movements, and open government being one of the latest of those that I've been involved in. And I'll say the change happens really slowly, and then all of a sudden it happens quickly. And that's what I hope is happening here as well. You know, when I started, I was one of the earliest activists about the commercial internet and the World Wide Web, and we ended up in a world where, actually, should I be facing this way for the, I guess you're broadcasting the slides anyway, so it doesn't matter. We started out, we were pushing the web, and nobody was taking it seriously, and then all of a sudden, bang, it was everywhere. And here we are, 20 years later, and the web is a ubiquitous part of our society. Same thing with open source software, which really became part of the foundation of the web. And I think that's also happening with open government. And there's a lot of one step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we are in the middle of an amazing transformation. My own personal work in this area started some years ago. I was actually a very early funder and supporter of Carl Malamed, who has done a lot of early work in the open government area. And in 2007, Carl and I organized a workshop on open government data, which laid out principles for that. And in the following year, in 2008, I started a conference that I called Gov 2.0. I was sort of in homage to another series of events I've done on so-called Web 2.0. And we did that in Washington for a couple of years. And then Jen Palka, who I worked with on that, left to start a nonprofit called Code for America. I became a board member of Code for America and worked with her on getting that going. Code for America is a nonprofit that tries to bring technology and tech talent to work on the problems of cities. And Eddie, who is here on the commission, is a former Code for America fellow, and it's partly through Eddie and the work with Code for America that I happen to be here. But I want to say I am really impressed by what is happening in Oakland and the work that Whitney is leading and this committee. I do think that when I started from the outside, the storyline was a lot of we have to fix government, it's broken. And then you go and you actually work with people in government, and you see how hard people are working. You see how passionate, some of the people, not all the people are. You realize there are change agents in government, and I would just say that Oakland's very lucky to have the people on this commission, people like Whitney, working this issue, and I'm hopeful that we will see enormous change. But what I want to do in this talk is to give you some context for thinking about open government in a slightly different way. One of my favorite quotes is from Edmund Schlossberg, who said, "The skill of writing is to create a context in which other people can think." And in the bulk of my activism, that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to sort of frame things in such a way that people can see what's going on. And when I first came to start my conference on open government, it was a period where everybody was starting to be excited about social media in government. The White House is on Facebook or has a YouTube channel, or the State Department is on Twitter. And I thought this was sort of insufficient. And I was looking for a different metaphor that would help us to understand what was important and why. And I'm going to tell you the story of how I got there. By the way, down at the bottom of the slide, I'm reminding you of my Twitter handle and the hashtag. But think about what's happened in the non-government space. I just took travel as an example. You remember if you wanted to go research a holiday back in the 90s even. You could look at guidebooks, you could look at magazines, you could send away for brochures, literally in travel and leisure there was a little bingo card, you may remember that, where you circled numbers from the ads and then they sent you a brochure in the mail. And the web changed all of that. And you now think of a site like TripAdvisor. I just did a quick search. I said Baja Hotels, and it tells me the hotel that thousands of travelers think is the best hotel. And I can get information, I can get rates, I can go online. This huge transformation in user self-service. When I'm looking for my flight, I can go to a site like HipMonk, and I kind of see this graphical display that shows me when the flights are, how much they cost, when they leave, when they arrive, and I can make my choice. This is this amazing transformation of the way we get information, which has happened in our lifetimes. And government has come part of the way there, but it's still got a long way to go. But what do we see in these, in the web? We see a standard platform for publishing and consuming data and services. We all have web browsers. They all speak the same language, whether using Internet Explorer or Safari or Chrome or Firefox. They all speak the same language, and the web servers on the other end all speak the same language. That's a key piece of what enabled that magic to happen, that transformation in the information landscape. There were data standards. You know, the fact that a site like Hipmunk can get information from all the airlines that put it together, they're getting data into standard formats. This customer self-service. You know, it used to be that you had to do all this stuff manually, and now you can kind of do it yourself with the aid of your computer. But more importantly, perhaps, there's multiple interfaces developed by third parties. So, you know, Hipmunk, to give you that example, is, you know, this kid actually used to work for me. Actually started working, developing code when he was in high school, wrote his first book for me. We sent him his contract and said, is it okay if my mom signs it, signs the contract because he was 15. He's this very talented developer, but he could build, this thing because we have this platform. And, we now see these interfaces that are simple, beautiful, and easy to use, and they also add value to this whole system. And that's kind of what we want for government, and that's what we're aiming for. So, when you look right now at the city of Oakland, I think, we now have a web interface. But what we're just starting to go towards are the benefits of real open data. Because in the old model, the city of Oakland would, for example, just put up a website. And go, that's okay, that's kind of like United Airlines putting up a website, or the Hilton Hotel in Cabo San Lucas putting up a website. But it's actually when you start to get beyond that into open data and aggregation that you can start to see new kinds of interfaces that allow you to do more, see more, and be more open with the data. So let me give you another example of this idea of platforms. Think about mobile phones. I have a picture of a Nokia phone from 2005 and the iPhone from 2007. Now, most of you remember when the iPhone came out, what a sensation it caused. That touch screen, multi-touch that you could drag, you could pinch, you could swipe, all these things that just gave it this sort of wonderful experience. But the real transformation of the iPhone, came in 2008 when Apple introduced the iPhone App Store. And suddenly, instead of 20 or 30 applications developed by the phone company and the phone provider, you had 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, now nearly 900,000 applications developed by the market because Apple turned the smartphone into a platform. And that was the big idea that I came to around government. Government at its best can also act like a platform. We actually see examples of that. For example, how many of you in the audience have smartphones with maps on them? Right? So you're actually using a government service even though you don't think about it, because all of those location-based services use a set of satellites that were put up by the US military. And those satellites, by a crucial policy decision, were opened up for civilian use. They originally designed military only for guiding missiles and for Polaris submarines. But after a U.S. airliner was shot down in 1983, Ronald Reagan said, "Wow, we really ought to open this up for civilian use once it's finished." It was another 15 years before it was finished, but it was opened up. And then in 2000, President Clinton said, "Well, let's not just restrict it to low precision, we'll give the full precision for civilian use." And as a result, we have all these location-based applications on our phones. That's government acting as a platform. Government does that with weather, with health data. There's all kinds of incredible movement. But that is what changes the game. If you think about how government has worked in the past, it's a lot like the phone market in 2005, and we're trying to make it like the phone market 2008 sense. That is where you open up data, you create interfaces, you allow people outside of government to build new kinds of systems. So that metaphor is what I mean by government as a platform. So, the old model, and this came together when I heard about this book called The Next American Government by a guy named Donald Kettle. And he used the metaphor of what he called vending machine government. Now, what he actually meant was you want government to have reliable, repeatable services. But I just heard the phrase, and I immediately thought, oh, wow, we put in taxes, we get out services. That's a very limited model of how government could work. And you contrast that to the cornucopia that you have in a true market. You don't just have a limited selection. You really have a platform that allows you to do a lot more. And more than that, you also you start to understand why the notion of government participation, or participation being simply finding a new way to tell government we're mad that they don't have the right stuff in the vending machine, is the wrong approach. And that's why I think where we're going is not, certainly the things that we're doing here, like having people give feedback in new ways, is important. But even further, we're trying to say, what would happen if instead of saying, well, you can do a FOIA request, for a particular piece of data, you just said, hey, it's all up all the time. Where you could basically start to create a culture of open data that would create the kind of richness that you see on the web or in the smartphone market, where people could say, oh yeah, we could find new ways to use that data creatively. And that's the thing that's happening all across government. It's not just, obviously this is focused on ethics and on transparency, but I think there's a real opportunity to rethink the whole model of what we do with government data and how we expect people to consume it. So I want to talk a little bit about this in the context of how real transparency changes not just how citizens can see government, but how government can see itself. Jen Falco, who, as I mentioned, is the founder of Coach America, is now on leave for a year at doing some of the same innovation work at the White House as the deputy CTO for the Obama administration. She was talking about some work that she'd seen in Louisville, Kentucky, where they have a program called LouisStat, where they're basically publishing statistics about all kinds of information about the city's performance. And she said, what I saw in Louisville was that it isn't about holding government accountable. It's giving government the tools to make itself better. Because if you take the point of view that there are people like the people here at this commission who really want to make this thing work better, then their sharing data with you is part of it, but it's also sharing data with each other and making visible what the issues are. So this is actually, again, going back to the big context, this is a key part of how the web works. When you look at a site like Google, it seems very simple. But there's all kinds of magic that happens because Google actually measures and reports on and looks at, studies performance data. Like when you see search results, you have to ask yourself, how did that result get to be number one? In the old way that you might imagine government working, it would be, well, they had some inside track and they made a deal, or they paid for it. And in fact, that was how before Google, how ads worked. The ads went for the highest bid. Google's breakthrough was that they figured out how to predict which ads people would actually click on, and they could sell them for less, because they'd actually make more money. An ad that costs $1 but gets clicked on 5 times as much is worth more than an ad that you sell for $2. Right? So that was their financial breakthrough. But their search breakthrough is also all about measurement. They look at things like when somebody clicks on a search result, they go away from the page. How long were they gone? Did they come right back? That means they didn't like the result. If they click on the first result, come right back, click on the second, come right back, click on the third, and then go away and stay. They go, oh, the third result was actually the one that they found most useful, right? So they do all kinds of things about measurement, and that idea of measurement is fairly critical and a big piece in all this. So in terms of kind of relating this on another level, how many people here in the audience saw the movie Moneyball or read the book? This is a book about the Oakland days, and in particular how they use data to understand the game better, and as a result able to compete in an era where there were a whole lot of teams that had a lot more money than they did. And they were able to find undervalued players and effectively do really well. It's a movie with Brad Pitt that came out in 2011. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth seeing because it really plays into this whole story about what we're actually doing with open data and government transparency. It's not just about gotcha, it's about understanding what we're doing in government, what's working, what's not. So the first piece is you open up the platform, you open the data, you let other people build outside interfaces to it, but then you start measuring what's working. And you build tools inside and outside government for understanding what works. So there's actually a fair amount of understanding and thinking about this. There was an article in The Atlantic just recently by the former Peter Orszag, who was the budget director for President Obama, and sorry, I forget the other author, but was the budget director for George W. Bush. Asking this question, can government play Moneyball? Talking about the difficulty, even when you measure things, how do you actually get the political change? And I think, again, that gives context for what you're seeing here. You have people who are saying, we're trying to do this, we're working hard to do it, we have tools, we're starting to build tools to do it, but we have to actually also muster the political will. And I think it's really important for all of you to support the people who are trying to make change happen. And I said that's the biggest thing that struck me when I first went to Washington and started working on open government was just how many people are trying so hard, and we really need to give them our support. But anyway, back to Louisville and the LouStat program. They actually publish a lot of data about themselves, and it's great for the public. They publish the salaries of all city employees, they publish the amount of overtime, they publish their goals. And what's really interesting is how this has changed the culture. It's gone from, wow, somebody's going to FOIA this and write an Instagram article about it, to the people in government saying, hey, wait, we understand that this information is going to be out there. So we're going to be trying to manage it. And you look at the details, they give themselves a score. I have to pick this up so I can see it. But this shows, how one of the big problems in government is the amount of time that gets spent on overtime. They're trying to manage that. They have a goal. They're beating it. The overtime hours. They're measuring the hours lost due to work-related injuries. They're publishing all this on their website in detail. But they also have their OSHA reportable injury rate, where they're both behind their goals, and they're showing the things that are green, the things that are red, things that are yellow, customer satisfaction, where they want to be. So this is really great stuff, but it kind of shows where we can go when government proactively opens up data rather than saying, well, we're going to hoard this stuff and we'll open it up only when somebody asks us, and we hope they won't, and maybe, in fact, if it embarrasses us, we'll hide it. And there's this big tension, as you know, even from some of the national security stories right now, in government between secrecy and openness, and it's a battle that we're all fighting. But anyway, over the last year, using LouStat, the Louisville Metro government removed more than 200 days from key administrative processes like hiring, reduced unscheduled overtime, and workers' comp by over $2 million. This is meaningful stuff that happens through open data and through measurement. So, I guess in conclusion, I just want to, sort of say, open data is a big part of this idea of government as a platform. It's a lot of how we start to get innovation happening from the outside. It reduces costs and improves outcomes. It gets us beyond gotcha and into the whole notion that we're working together on performance improvement, and allows us to get innovation from the outside. And I like to think that what you're trying to do here in Oakland is in fact going to be a model. If we do it right, it's going to be a model for how this works everywhere in future. So I'm optimistic. I know there's still a long way to go. I think everybody here knows there's a long way to go. But I'm super excited that there's the level of commitment and interest and leadership in trying to move this ball forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. O'Reilly. So we're going to take a few minutes. There's a few things we're going to try and do. We're going to field some questions from commissioners. We'd also like to acknowledge that two city council members have joined us, both Councilmember Libby Schaaf as well as Councilmember Dan Kolb, so we appreciate them being here as well. And then we're going to hear from what I'm calling our digital bullpen, and I just made that up because I thought it was cool.
So, shall I sit down? Or?
Would you stay, please, okay, for about another 5 to 10 minutes, possibly? Is there something else?
Well, I'd just like to add that since the council members are here, that tells me that Public Safety Committee has ended, so that means we're live on KTOP. And please, folks from home, text. There's a notation at the bottom of your screen. So welcome to our transparency hearing, and please participate by sending in your text message. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have any questions for Mr. O'Reilly?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I come from the technology world. I understand the idea of building a platform or building reusable components. You know, this sort of more lightweight kind of thinking about just building systems. But one of the things that I've been able to see sitting in the commission and learning about how government works is that this is actually a very regulated environment, and there's laws that prevent what would seem to be very simple technological solutions to be impossible to implement because of the requirements. So I found it interesting that you said that even the GPS system took 15 years after Reagan wanted to open it up. So are we talking about this being 15 years from now that we have to start with? This is a culture change that's going to require changing laws for a while before the technology catches up, or is this something that somehow there's the technology and the laws catch up to and are meaningful immediately or relatively quickly?
You know, I think it's probably a mix of all those things, and I will say that, my experience is, almost entirely from the private sector. I've been, started to, over the last few years being active in Washington, and at somewhat at the city level. But, and in the private sector, you do have a very, very different dynamic in that, you have a large entrenched institution that says we don't want to change, and somebody comes along who's not bound by their rules, does it differently, and puts them out of business. We saw that with the web. We've seen that with different segments in the software industry. It's a lot harder to do with government because government, by definition, has a monopoly on a whole set of things, and if they don't want to change, it's very hard to change from the outside. That being said, I think there are things that government is doing that actually creates the possibility of people outside the system making change. And that is, in fact, what happens somewhat when government opens up data. And it's a shift in the model. And I think there's certainly buy-in to the model at a lot of levels of government that have said, okay, well, we are going to open up certain classes of data. And I think as we see the benefits and we see services built by outside vendors that actually, deliver services to citizens without government having to actually build the service and, go through all the hoops, I think we may see some of that accelerate. But I think there will be areas where there's just going to be saying, no, we're not going to play by those rules, and there'll be entrenched groups that work the system, and it's going to be hard. And I think and there's kind of a schizophrenic side to it. Just looking at it from the national security side right now, I go, here's President Obama, who on the one hand is talking government transparency, and I think from interactions I have with people who work for him, really means it. And then at the same time, you have all this stuff happening with the National Security Agency, and you kind of go, well, government is a big thing with a lot of people in it, and a lot of different competing interests, and things like that. Change takes a long time, and it matters for citizens to care and to keep pushing and to keep working. But I do think that there's a really wonderful opportunity to have more leverage that we're not just outside, and there are people inside government who are opening up and giving us platforms and tools and levers that we can use to actually innovate and create new kinds of opportunities for change.
Great, thank you. Is there another question from any of the commissioners? Great. I believe Sheila, who is our Code for America Fellow and volunteer tonight, has some questions on Twitter.
A couple of people, there's been a back and forth about people are unsure how the answer for lack of transparency / accountability in Oakland lies in technology tools. The willingness to be transparent should come first, according to some of our followers. And they cite as examples politicians and people within governments hiding or destroying records, and how our own ethics commission is underfunded, and why are tech tools becoming the priority?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that technology is a means, not an end, and that you don't get change just through technology. But technology can, be an important tool. And there are a lot of different technologies. Some are very simple. And a great example, is given in a book called about healthcare called the Checklist Manifesto. Checklists are something that pilots use and surgeons generally don't. But this guy named Peter Pronovost, who started a movement for there to be surgical checklists. I mean, just literally, you have the list of things and you follow it religiously. And that keeps you from leaving a sponge inside the surgical patient, or, so Atul Gawande, who was a Boston surgeon who also writes for the New Yorker and is a beautiful author, wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto about the use of surgical checklists and the culture change that goes with it. And, here's the technology is very simple, but it's really about culture change. And that's what we found at Code for America as well. In some ways, the technology is the Trojan horse that gets you in there and, has culture change with it. So, for example, in this checklist environment, when one of the items on the checklist is all the people in the operating theater have to introduce themselves by name, that changes the dynamic between the surgeons and the nurses. When the nurses are given things that they can ask the surgeon, and the surgeon has to say yes, I've done it, or no, I haven't. That changes the dynamic between the nurses and the surgeons. So there are things that you can kind of embed sometimes in technology that lead to process change, and process change that leads to culture change. And I think that it's really important to realize that change, just as institutions are complex, change is complex. And there are people who kind of say, oh yeah, well, this is just, technology is magic fairy dust. No, it isn't. Technology is a lever that lets you pry something open. And what you do once you open it, is a lot more complex than that.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Arved.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Our next speaker is Lauren Ellen McCann, who is the National Policy Manager for the Sunlight Foundation. She is working to help build, expand, and support transparency and open data initiatives around the country and the world. She leads Sunlight's work on state and local issues, including Sunlight's newest venture in municipal data disclosure. Lauren Allen also directs Sunlight's largest annual community gathering, Transparency Camp, which is an unconference for knowledge exchange between open government advocates, and has inspired similar events across the globe. Ms. McCann also wins the award for traveling the farthest. She's here from Washington, D.C., and I know it's late. Thank you for being here.
I'll also turn around, only a lot shorter, to awkwardly greet the room, but I will give you my back because I think I'll be up there too. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you here today. As Whitney said, my name is Lauren Ellen McCann, and I'm the National Policy Manager at the Sunlight Foundation. Sunlight is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. that's dedicated to using the power of the internet to catalyze greater government openness and transparency. We take our name from a famous adage by former Chief Justice Brandeis, who once said that sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. Electric light the most efficient policeman. Since our founding in 2006, our work has helped to illuminate connections between influence and political power, bringing light to issues ranging from money in politics and lobbying to the new frontier of data disclosure. We believe that there is an integral relationship between technology, openness, and transparency, and it's one that cities like Oakland are incredibly well poised to explore. Cities are important because in many ways, people live more of their lives in cities than in countries. We may call our nation state home when we're trying to describe the broadest context of where we're from, but our days and nights are spent living, working, sleeping, breathing in the realities of cities and towns. I raise this because coming from a national organization, I want you to know how special the context of a local government really is. And I hope that having a little bit of an outsider perspective is not unwelcome in reviewing what's going on in terms of transparency here in Oakland. For even when our attention is directed elsewhere, whether on the federal government or on neighborhood potholes, it's our local government that presents us with the unparalleled opportunities to see our needs and frustrations and ideas literally reflected in the world around us, or stymied, as the case might be. But cities, like all governing bodies, operate in a world of competing priorities, and there are, as you're well aware, budgets to balance, schools to improve, taxes to collect, parks to clean. And now, in the middle of everything, there's this articulated demand for openness, for citizens to be included in the process of governing. I say articulated because the general need for citizen inclusion isn't new. It's the fundamental understanding of a functional democracy. In democratic government, citizens participate in their own governance because they have informed representation, which means that becoming informed and therefore having access to government information are critical parts of making the whole system work. Advances in technology have changed we the people's understanding of what we should and can be aware of when it comes to our government. And as we've moved from the printing press and the radio tower to the home television, computer, smartphone, tablet, iPhone, Android, we've moved from asking what government has done to what government is doing. And we've opened the door to new questions, questions about how our government makes decisions, why they make these decisions, and who is involved in the decision-making process. We codified our freedom of information in public meetings and public records laws at the federal, state, and local level in order to ensure our ability to answer these who, what, where, when, why, and how questions about governance. And while in 2013, we find ourselves wrestling with a whole new series of questions related to how the government shares electronic information, the basic principles have remained the same. Number one, the public should have access to public information. In 2013, this means that public information should mean online information. Anything that belongs to the public should not only be easy to access, but also within reach of where citizens expect to find it. This goes back to what Tim was showing, typing into your average URL search bar and being able to return results. And this also means that information must remain findable at a stable location or available through archives in perpetuity. And that part gets locked out a lot. Number two, transparency is the government's responsibility. We are right to celebrate that given the power of the internet, many of us, school teachers, bicyclists, business owners, can now play the role of journalists in reporting on and reviewing the work of government. But doing transparency to an institution is neither sustainable nor ideal. Our governments, big and small, are the stewards of our public interests, and as such have an obligation not just to be open to public scrutiny, but to include the public. This means that it's government's responsibility to take action and proactively disclose information. And I think that's the phrase that gets repeated the most after this meeting. It is the most important phrase, proactive disclosure. It also means that transparency shouldn't be treated as an optional activity, but considered an essential part of the process of governing. Or in other words, number three, the default should be set to open. Another major hit, tweet that phrase for the rest of this session. Most public record systems, including FOIA itself, the Freedom of Information Act, are systems of reactive disclosure, which means that a question has to be asked before an answer is given, information requested before it is disclosed, assuming that you're looking for information in a state that doesn't have one of the 500 exemption laws that are possible depending upon where you are in the US. Proactive disclosure means that the release of information online in electronic formats comes before the question, comes before the ask. It doesn't obliterate records requests. I know we'd all like to see those go down, but it does refine them. And in addition to all the public good, proactive disclosure also has the potential for purely practical government improvements. Actually, just earlier this month, Kent, Ohio approved a measure that would transition all electronic documents, asterisks, except for those that are not subject to the public records law, that the city council touches, because it will not only help the staff of that council find, manage, and share with the public that information, it will also save money on the amount of paper Kent was using, as well as the staff time it was using to both manage the records and the paper. So how do we turn these principles and others into practice? Just as there's no single switch that will turn on transparency, there's also no one right answer, but there are a lot of important tactics for policy development and opening data that have been tried in other communities that I think would be useful to your work here. From a policy perspective, three prime components are as follows. The first is to gather your stakeholders. Transparency reforms, like most political reforms, thrive when supported by a diverse group of invested local actors. The Sunlight Foundation Dream Team of Transparency Coalitions consists of community figures, that could be individuals or groups, civil society organizations, both those engaged in technology and those that are not yet, government officials, journalists and bloggers, as well as technologists and civic hackers. The exact components, ratios, and people should reflect the political context in which the coalition is being formed. In Raleigh, North Carolina, the business sector is very well invested and a part of the local community there because Raleigh, North Carolina is in the heart of the Research Triangle, which is part of the Raleigh-Durham area, and a lot of major organizations are based there. And as a result, corporations like Red Hat have helped to organize and support efforts like Raleigh City Camp. In Salt Lake City, Utah, the stakeholder group is incredibly rich with journalists and bloggers because after the Utah legislature almost rolled back their public records law, sounds a little familiar, in 2011, this kind of old school journalist community awoke to the role of technology in their oversight. And as Washington, D.C. is in its really early stages of revisiting its own municipal transparency advocacy, groups like Sunlight, who have traditionally focused on the federal government, are joining with our local Code for America Brigade and forging ties with the local nonprofits that are or soon to be wielding data in their advocacy. Second, let your community set priorities. What does Oakland need to do to operate more transparently? What data should your government be releasing? Those are not questions that I can answer for you because they're incredibly complicated and incredibly specific to Oakland. From Sunlight's perspective, the long-term goal of proactive disclosure means that all public information is made available online and is accessible to the public with no restriction and in formats that encourage reuse. This means everything from transportation data and meeting minutes to RFPs and crime reports to campaign finance and geolocated street trees as part of a package. But when it comes to short-term release, you need to ask your local stakeholders where to start. 1 year ago, Philadelphia did just that. In anticipation of a push for an open data policy that was going to come very heavily just through the government, members of the local technology community decided to get together and create the Open Data Race. The race charged local nonprofit organizations to determine what information they needed from government to do their jobs better, to deliver better services to the public that they didn't think that they had access to now. As The organizers of the race began to get responses back. They went through each and every application, and when that data was already available, they connected the organization with that data, and when it wasn't, they collected it into a list. When they had the final list, about 30 or so data sets, they turned back to the organizations and they said, those of you that get the topmost votes for your data to be released will get this fabulous monetary reward and all this attention, but we're also going to bring those data set requests to the city government and ask for them to be released. So you'll have this huge coalition behind you. The only thing that you have to do is reach into your own constituencies and get that power building. They used Facebook as the organizing platform. The brilliance of this is that they didn't say, this is a Facebook challenge, only people on Facebook get to like and participate. They put it to those local nonprofit groups and had them organize through their own means to channel it back to one central source. As a result, hundreds of Philadelphians participated, and they came up with a final list. Although many of those data sets have yet to be released, the open data race was a powerful experiment because it encouraged organizations that were not traditionally techie or transparency focused to see direct value of open data for their specific communities and to advocate for it for themselves within those communities. I also believe that the open data race was powerful because it was an experiment. Which brings me to my third point. Iteration. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Although technology has changed our understanding of what kind of access to information is possible, we are so slow to adapt one of tech's better lessons, which is iteration. The art of trying, getting it wrong, asking for feedback, and trying again. As a perfectionist, this is an incredibly hard lesson to take to heart, but it's one that really fuels Sunlight's approach to development, and I mean that in the sense of whether we're talking about policy development, building communities, or building apps. The reality is we are all prone to human error, and the first time you write a law or release a data portal, you're going to do something wrong. Rather than, say, follow in Florida's footsteps and invest $5 million in a new budget transparency platform that doesn't really improve on the old one and then never actually release it to the public, you could attempt to create transparency initiatives that slowly build on minor successes and great successes too. A better example of this is what New York City did by holding its spending transparency platform in beta for over a year before releasing a series of upgrades throughout this year, 2013, that culminated in making the whole platform open source. The same goes for policy. Publishing open data is an ongoing process that requires attention to quality and upkeep, and the same should be said for the official regulations that protect and establish that data. As we note in the final provision of Sunlight's open data policy guidelines, in order to keep up with the times, current best practices, and feedback from existing policy oversight, modern transparency policies should be written in a way that makes them open to future revision. Although the federal government has been gardening its digital strategy along similar lines for the last few years, it's, I'm sorry to say, your neighbors in San Francisco that have demonstrated the most enthusiasm for this idea. In April, San Francisco updated the open data policy that they passed in 2009 to add a number of new provisions, such as data audits and indexes, which is, I think, an awesome thing for many city governments to pursue, and something that is actually a trend that really only seems to be rising in US cities. So my little shout out, Oakland, if you do it and you do it right, you will be the first to have done it. So, but not only did San Francisco add provisions, like these data indexes, they also upgraded some of their timeline implementations, and by so doing, they were the first city that we've come across that has not only updated their open data policy at all, but has done it twice since they first passed it. We can talk about the particulars of open data formats and real-time disclosure and bulk data, all subjects that are near and dear to my heart, but it will be the execution of these technical formats in an iterative, proactive, and most importantly, public process that will reveal just how revolutionary data disclosure can be. This is the new frontier of transparency in open government. Non-artificial, two-way communication between public servants and the public about both technical and political issues. Slow democracy paired with fast technology. Here in Oakland, you're starting the revolution at meetings like this one, where you're gearing up your own dream team stakeholders, supporting programs and ideas that originate both from within the community and from within government, laying critical infrastructure for the cultural shift necessary to change the way government thinks about engaging with its constituents and about the way citizens think about their relationship with government. When the League of California Cities moved against SB 1002 last year, which was a bill that would have explored the possibility of implementing open data standards, not actually necessarily implement them, for both state and local agencies, they claim that among the bill's many abuses was its lack of urgency. In not so many words, they conveyed that there was no open data fire that needed putting out, so there's no need to address open data preemptively. Sunlight charges that we don't need to wait, nor should we be waiting for a new open data or transparency fire before we act. In fact, we have plenty of old flames to choose from, whether we're going to think about the infamous Bell or California's recent public records seal, or even some of the conflict between the Oakland Public Ethics Commission and the City Council. To choose to wait for fire only perpetuates this old system of reactive disclosure, which continues to put citizens on one side and government on the other. Communities like Oakland are designed and destined, I will even go so far to say, to break this mold and to turn passive stewardship of the public interest into something more resembling a community barn raising. The hardest part is just getting started, but as you continue forward, please know that you have allies. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Do any of the commissioners have a question for our speaker? Anyone? Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for that tremendous presentation. I appreciate you traveling so far and giving such an eloquent dialogue. You talked a lot about getting started, and that's what my question has to do with. How do we get started? Because we can have conversations about systemic change, process, culture, and those conversations are good conversations to have and effective conversations to have. But it seems to me as if we need to actually have boots on the ground change in the way that the citizens of Oakland deal with their government with regard to their open records requests. Do you recommend identifying a subset of data to potentially explore technological options with, or look at it as a wholesale systemic issue?
Interesting. That's a great question. I would break it down as follows. If you feel like you're having a lot of conversations about the same thing, I would one ask if you're continuing to have it with the same people. If the answer is yes, I think one positive step forward is to again go back to the stakeholder question, look at the different districts where conversations are happening, and opportunities. Boots on the ground can sometimes just be organizing the same conversation in new contexts and being able to shape what comes out of it by the input of new actors. If you're in an experimental mood, I think that, and you have specific feedback on corrections to this public records law, I think that you should try something. I think whether it's a short-term experiment in proactive data disclosure to show that with certain conditions, the city can handle releasing public information before it's requested, or keeping a public stream of requests as they're coming in. These are options that are available, and my point about iteration is that I know there's a lot of pressure on government to get it right the first time because you have all the weight of taxpayer dollars upon you, and people are not particularly kind when they think that a couple of pennies are being spent, myself included. But that said, if you're able to keep this kind of open dialogue as you're pursuing these experiments, and you allow people to help shape the kind of experiments that you pursue, I think you'll find that the people of Oakland are going to be a lot more open to experimentation. It's only when all of a sudden the government rolls out, again, this new, sorry Florida, roll you under the bus, but like rolls out this entirely new platform without any public dialogue or feedback based on old systems that exist, that there's complete public outreach and it's completely reserved. But what I hear in what you've said is that there's a genuine desire to connect, and so I think that kind of effort paired with the ability to technically implement, or even to have a series of community, like hyper-local conversations about it that culminate even into just a visioning of what such a platform would look like, even if there aren't the resources to build it, would be pretty transformational. And to the point about we're perpetually just getting started, and I know that can kind of sound buzzwordy over time, but it's also to cut some slack about where you are. It's not to say that you are off the hook and no longer accountable for not being the most transparent government, but that this is a series of processes. Even if you make change within one agency, you still probably have dozens more to deal with. So I think that there's a lot of different phases to this, but you should take that enthusiasm and try something.
Thank you so much. I know that Ms. Barazotto has a question as well.
Yeah, I was wondering, I made a note in my notes, what information should be released, and then you started talking through that and saying that it should come from the community. And then you had two specific questions around let the community decide what the priorities should be in terms of what data and information should be made public. I caught the second one, so I wanted to see if you could repeat those two questions, and then I'd love for people to give us feedback and actually say what types of information all of you would want government to release so we can start our own list. So whether it's through Texas Interview Act or on public comment cards, if you could just make a note, let's start our list. So could you repeat those two
Absolutely. I think the questions were, what can Oakland be doing to operate more transparently? And what data should the government release? This is very exciting. I hope people take this opportunity and text and tweet.
Thank you so much. I know that Commissioner Tejeda also has a question.
This is less of a question and more of an ask, I guess. So the Sunlight Foundation has it primarily been focused on national level, but you also have a view of things that are going on across the country. And Sunlight Foundation has done a great job at defining things like open data and defining as meaning machine readable, and they have a 10 list definition of open data, which is great. But actually, something that I think would be great to have as well is to be able to see the different approaches of different cities and how they go about this, trying to make their governments transparent. I know, for example, Chicago and New York have very, very different approaches to some of the work that's with this topic that looks very different than the work in Oakland. But to be able to get a bird's eye view, to know what the landscape looks like. And I'm curious if this is something that the Sunlight Foundation is interested in, sort of hopping at the local level and being able to assess exactly what is going on and figure out some of the best practices.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, I guess, to talk about our work, and for me now to invite comments and feedback, even if it lasts beyond this meeting. As Eddie mentioned, Sunlight's a 7-year-old organization, and for the vast majority of our history, we've just looked at the federal government. Within the last 2 years, we expanded to the international level, and officially at the top of 2013 to the municipal level. Because I too have had conversations trying to translate the Sunlight's 10 principles of open data into actual policy, or things that people can chew the meat on and translate into other things besides policy, different referendums and such. Last summer, we issued a series of open data policy guidelines, the goal of which you can find at sunlightfoundation.com/policy/open data, was to demonstrate that policies regulating the transparency of electronic information can be about a whole lot more than just data portals. It can actually do things like grounding open data in the Freedom of Information Act, like addressing specific questions about reuse. When it comes to how other municipalities are taking action along these and other policy issues within this kind of suite of open government open data issues, that's explicitly the work of the team that I lead. So we've only been around in Sunlight for 6 months, although I've been at Sunlight for longer. And one of the goals that we have by August is to release a new portal within our local page, which is sunlightfoundation.com/policy/local, that will be a collection of case studies, both those that we've discovered and those that are given to us or that we find in our own research, that'll be showing how not only these different provisions of open data in policy are being played out in different cities, but also how open data has applied to different policy issues and data sets. So, for example, for zoning or lobbying or crime reports. So that is to say, stay tuned for the end of the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I believe that Commissioner Kimberly has a follow-up, and then we'll go to you, and then we'll head to the digital bullpen for some information.
Thank you. The last public speaker mentioned something about access to information, and different districts have different levels of access to information. And so my question is, how do we develop a system that takes into account the various individuals that make up Oakland, and how do we give them access to the records in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind?
That's a tall order. I think that's something that a lot of different groups are starting to explore, and it ties in a lot of thematic issues related to digital divide and even just internet access. I have a vision that I would love to see played out in municipalities, which is making better use of libraries and third spaces that already exist within the city where people already congregate as opportunities for technology engagement. This isn't just about broadband, but this is about actually having access ports where people congregate. A lot of libraries provide computer stations, and I don't know if I'm necessarily pitching that you have a desktop app in every library that takes you to your public records portal, but you could. But this is also thinking about how, if part of the problem is that citizens aren't using your electronic tools, thinking about how the citizens are pitched those tools, is that actually reaching them at all? And I think that's more something that would require some internal survey work done. I don't know if I could speak to the nature of that. But also looking for physical spaces where people are. There are a couple of cities that are looking at taking on initiatives that address ward or district inclusivity, and Chicago is one. And I'd be happy to make connections between the very early stages of that project and anyone on the council or in the broader community who'd like to know what they're up to.
That would be great. Also, if you could send our executive director or any of us information regarding the municipalities, pardon me, that you spoke of earlier, I think Kent, Ohio, and Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yes.
And other municipalities that experience success stories.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
The question that was just asked was actually the question that I was going to ask. I'm struck by the chasm between the comments made by Esther in District 7, who is, as she says, out of it, and the missing connection there. And as you suggested, we asked what data should be released. I wondered how that question could be asked in a way that would elicit meaningful responses from people in District 7. Mm-hmm. And you've begun to answer that question by talking about using public spaces to increase the use of technology in places that are maybe more impoverished or may not have that technology available, as easily available.
Mm-hmm. I think I would also add to that some experiences that we've had in Washington, D.C., where we face very similar issues and also broken down by ward as a municipal government, not as the federal government. One of the early projects that came out of our Code for America Brigade chapter was a simple collection of information about our area neighborhood councils, which is the most hyper-local form of government in the District of Columbia. It's also one that, depending upon which ward you're in, either is one of the most highly attended public meetings or one of the worst. And it kind of is flipped from how we traditionally understand power. By creating a resource that also benefited our hyper-local governments and engaging them with the process of data collection, we began to talk with them about issues that their constituents are interested in. So it was a nice way of even just building a bridge to, again, community figures who serve as translation points and who can talk not just about data, but also about other priorities that might not be expressed in scenarios where people feel that the only thing on the table is technology that's inaccessible. I think that the power of those figures and making contact through both government and community organizations is going to be incredibly powerful.
Thank you. I believe we might have some comments from Ellen. Adam, sorry.
My name is Adam Slack. I'm a volunteer with Oakland and the Public Ethics Commission. I'll try to summarize. So I'm looking at text as in the information, the questions, the comments that are coming in through text message. I'll just share a few of the comments, and these are all ones that have been repeated. The basic idea has been repeated a few times, so showing some sense of interest from people. First, for the question of what data specifically should be shared, the most relevant to that was submitted via text message was that budget data should be more transparent, and I promise it's a total coincidence that that's exactly what I'm working on. But I was happy to see that. The other one touches on access. Here's a comment. The city is clearly making an effort to be transparent, but there are lots of barriers to accessing and understanding data. And that was reflected in a few different comments, so access and barriers. Another one about the Sunshine Ordinance. It says the Sunshine Ordinance is very outdated, written for another time, officials afraid to make common sense changes. Another one that was echoed a few times, the city needs a fully staffed public ethics commission. And a bit of context for that, there was an article that a lot of people have been talking about today that mentioned that San Francisco has 17 staff members on its public ethics commission, and Oakland has 1. And lastly, and this is both through Texas and also I've seen this all day. People have been wanting to hear about this on Twitter and elsewhere. People would like to hear the Public Ethics Commission's comments on the Alameda Grand Jury report that was just released. That's all.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you so much for your time and for a really terrific presentation. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alyssa Black, Director of the California Civic Innovation Project. And Aspen was just telling me we were going to move to the next speaker, which is true, but Alyssa Black couldn't make it tonight, and all I wanted to do was mention that she provided written testimony, and if you'd like a copy, there are copies in the back. If somehow we run out, it is also available on our website already now on our Transparency Project page, so you can also find it there. And so, yes, we will be moving on now to our next speaker. Caroline Brewster is our next speaker. She's Director of the Partnership for Public Accountability with California Forward. In this role, Ms. Brewster drives civic engagement through communication strategies and political outreach using technological initiatives and social media. Before joining California Forward, Ms. Brewster worked in the California State Legislature as well as for the Lieutenant Governor's California Commission for Economic Development. She also has been following closely the state-level discussion about the California Public Records Act, and hopefully will share some thoughts on that as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. If we could switch to the PowerPoint as well, whoever's the boss. Thank you. And thank you all, and I apologize for turning. California Forward, as some of you may know, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan government reform organization. Though unlike Sunlight, we did not begin in the world of transparency. We've been working on initiatives since 2008 to improve government structures for things like state budgeting, sorely needed there, the relationship between state and local governments, and even general efforts on improving elections in California as well. And across the board there, we realized that both decision makers and the public need good information. And with that information, it's difficult to get people to realize how we need to change the rules so better results occur. So that's how we kind of backed into the transparency world. And this year, California Forward released a State of the Transparency report. And so I'm here tonight to give you some of the top lines from that report and also to report back to you and to thank the City of Oakland for its good work and efforts and to encourage you to continue along that path. So thank you for having me be here. It's working. So a transparent government, according to California Forward, does three key things. The first is that prior to a decision being made, that information is available to the public. That also means that there's a back and forth between the public and the elected officials who are making that information once it's time for the decision to be made. And then lastly, it's the communication back and outward of what decision was made and the results-based tracking that occurs once that decision has been reached. So we know that there's problems on the statewide level. You've heard it touched upon a couple times. But basically, what we discovered at California Forward was with the lack of good information, bad decisions are being made. We live in the Bay Area. We have access to great innovations. We're kind of at the hub of the technology center of the world. And yet we being government and are slow adapters to that good technology. On the statewide level, since I worked in the legislature, I witnessed firsthand, especially on the budget. It's a really bad way of making decisions. There's decisions and switches that are made, in the dead of night. California Forward actually applauded the legislature about a week ago for putting up online most of its trailer budget bills approximately 72 hours before there was going to be a budget vote. There was some back and forth between the good government advocates because it wasn't even a full 72 hours. And with all the bills, with all the pages in the bills, with all the text and all the complications in the budget, we, being the advocates and the news media, actually missed the portion in there that removed the funding for the local level for the California Public Records Act. So I think that triple underscores why it's so important to have transparency in the state level budget making process and how far we still have to go. So our good friends in the room have given California as a state a D, a deserved D, we think. I won't go through all the problems that we're still dealing with, but basically there's a lot of room for improvement on the statewide level. So to make this a little interactive, you have a big clue here. Does anyone know when the Brown Act was passed? Public?
76.
53, I heard it. We have a winner. I'm surprised that my friends from the League of Women Voters weren't shouting it out. But this is a problem because this was obviously written too long ago to withstand our current technology and to be responsive to the current public needs. So it's no longer the 20th century, but we still have a legal framework that is still being challenged that is barely doing what it needs to do. And the cities and the counties that are just looking to the Brown Act and to the Bean Act as what they need to be achieving are not scoring well in the realm of transparency.
So we know that policymakers themselves don't have the access to the information that they need to make these decisions, let alone the citizens who need this information in order to hold their electeds accountable. Though I did truly enjoy the quote from Sunlight's founder about, it's really not about, just holding them accountable. It's about giving them the power and the tools to make great, better decisions and to improve the government from within the inside. I think that's really laudable. And we know what happens because of that is that citizens are disengaged. We have very low, we're the 45th ranked voter participation rate in the state. And even though we weren't a bad actor in the previous election cycle, that is certainly nothing that we should be proud of. So we've seen many versions of smartphones, but the current standard is if you can't search for it online and readily get that information, then people assume that government is hiding it from them. So we've heard data used a lot. When California Forward was looking at the current state of affairs in California, we think that it's important for the information to be available in whatever form, online, outside the hearing room, in a format that's accessible. And that's what we're talking about when we say transparent data. So it must be an active enterprise of government. They must be, and it must be moving towards a more interactive approach to transparency in government. So we heard a little bit of the history from Mr. Riley at the beginning, and in 2009, President Obama launched data.gov. The city of Vancouver was actually one of the very early adopters. There have been good actors, though, moving forward, and I would include the city of Oakland in that list of folks that are moving along towards the right direction. Though there's still, is much work to be done, and especially to be done on the state level, since I have to commit to our report. So there's a lot of opportunities that exist as government moves towards a more transparent and open process. We truly believe, and this is where California Forward entered the transparency in government business, I guess, is that better policies result when both the stakeholders and the electeds have better information available, and when that information is available before the decisions are being made, even better. Imagine how that would look in our state budget format. And we believe, and actually it's really exciting to see, as I will get to, what the city of Oakland is doing. There's great advocates in the room. I was happy to chat with your Code for America, and you're doing great things already. There's much work to be done, as was mentioned by the resident. There's issues with access, but you're moving along the right path. So we know that the public wants and demands data, and they need their information quickly. So where should the city of Oakland be looking forward? We think that overall, especially on the statewide level, there's 3 key areas. So first, expanding access to reliable data on public spending, planning, and outcomes. The second, expanding disclosure of campaign contributions. And third, ending closed decision-making procedures, especially in the budgeting process. So where is Oakland along all these 3 measures? Well, they just ended some closed decision-making procedures in regards to their city budget. So hats off, and that's a great move in the right direction. The mayor, who may still be here, publishes her calendar online. Another good move.
Step on way behind.
That information, I apologize, we should be moving in the spirit of having that information available online. The public participation policy in the city's budget process is one that should be encouraged. It's kind of in its infancy as I understand, but that is the right direction as well. As far as expanding access to reliable data on public spending, planning, and outcomes, I was just chatting about some of the issues with getting comparable budget data, the mayor's budget as well as the council's, as that moves through the process. I understand that that's a challenge, and that you're working with the different departments and agencies to try to figure out how to overcome that. And we would give you any support, and California Forward stands behind that move. Open Oakland and Open Budget Oakland are great examples of those moves in the right direction, and should definitely be encouraged. So something close to my heart, I get to work in our elections world, and we can't just bag on the state. We actually do have some friends in the transparency world up in California. One is our state controller, another is the chair of the FPPC, Ann Ravel. And she is committed to developing a statewide database overall for all the Form 700 forms. Currently, the state, as you probably are in this room are well aware, can and does not accept those forms online directly to the FPPC, and there is no online searchable database. However, the City of Oakland, I believe, just began accepting those Form 700s and does have a public access portal using one of the two vendors that produces that in the state. So as I've tried to reiterate, we do applaud Oakland's efforts. We think that you're on the right track and direction. The questions from the commissioners have been really outstanding. I can tell there's a lot of desire and interest, and obviously you have a community of support behind you that really wants this kind of good government transparency. One thing that is hot off the presses that you might want to put on the list to look into is the so-called checkbook. This is on the U.S. PERG's transparency list of good things to do in transparency. I'll brag on the state again real quick. Actually, 48 of the states have a checkbook on the statewide level. California is one of the two that does not. But many cities are starting to do this, and New York City has a great one, and I know that your Code for America team is already connected with them, which is great. A city in California that did not have a great transparency track record, but is trying to turn that around, the City of Bell, is actually trying to implement that now too. So you would be among friends who are trying to work on that in California. And as your executive director mentioned at the beginning, we really see the opportunity and kind of the debacle that occurred last week in the legislature over the California Public Records Act. Our executive director put out, and he's a journalist by trade, but doesn't have a lot of time to write articles. But he decided to write one last week, and he had a great quote in there that, this is not transparency is not a state local mandate, it is the public's mandate. We need to give this to our citizens, and we'll figure out how the costs are going to be covered. But the electeds and the commissioners know people view government as kind of this big, they don't see the different levels. So it really doesn't matter who's bearing the cost. All government on all levels needs to be working towards this more open, more transparent goal that the City of Oakland is. So we think that this is an opportunity to seize upon, not anything to cower under or worry about what the legislature is going to do. And the City of Oakland is actually already leading on many of these issues, so it's just a great jumping off point. And in the spirit of transparency, I would be happy to speak to anyone. If you didn't get a transparency report, I brought some copies, but understand that this is a packed room for a very important hearing, so I'd love to speak with any of you, and thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you to the Commission.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the Commission? Mr. Tejeda, go ahead.
So just a few days ago, I was interested in just looking at templates for how different cities in California do their budgets and how they publish them all. And it was incredible. Pretty much every city publishes in PDF, which then makes it practically useless to compare and just get a sense of how different cities are doing things. And I was wondering if, I don't know if in your list of priorities, I didn't see basically open data or standards for publishing information, of how information is published. I think there's a lot of great stuff that can be done at a local level, but I also I find myself always seeing the limit coming at the state level. For example, and this was mentioned today about the consequences for violating the Public Records Act. Like, there's a lot of limitations that come from the state level, and I wonder how much the state can, or how much you guys can help push for these kinds of standards, so that cities can then start replicating them.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. To start by telling a frustrating story from the Cal Forward side, so we actually have on our website a transparency portal. And on that portal, you can look up your city and your county, and it has comparable data points in 5 areas. And this was something that we thought, it's crazy that you can't go to the state website and see it. If you go to the state transparency website, I'm sure many of you have done, it's a frozen website with links to various different databases. So we said, okay, people, as Sunlight mentioned, government is local, people live in these cities, and they need this type of information. When we started to pull it, which was this is self-reported like budget and data information from the city and counties to the state controller's office. I mean, it's really apples and oranges. And when the cities themselves will never quote this data, and in fact got upset when they learned that we were using it, when this was their own self-reported information. So I'm underscoring your point that there needs to be data standards, and we're firmly behind that. We as California Forward, there are leaders in the fields of transparency, so we're not trying to write those standards, but we're certainly in support of their establishment.
Commissioner Kimberly.
Thank you. I meant to mention this earlier when I made a few comments. This is great having everyone here. This is what every single meeting should be like. But before I ask my question, I want to point out a group of women that come to meetings every month and are fighting for the residents of Oakland about this issue every month, and that's the League of Women Voters. So my question is a question that I'd like to ask every one of the presenters, and it has to do with living in the age of electronically stored information and the amount of information that's created by city governments, and finding a way to make that information accessible without shutting down the government. For instance, email produces so many gigabytes, megabytes, whatever it is, of information that could fill the Library of Congress. And how do we find a workable solution so that that information can get in the hands of the residents of Oakland without needlessly dragging the city's resources to a place that is just unsustainable?
Great question. When we started to work on this report, we said rather uneloquently that we wanted to insist upon the opposite of data dump, which, it's easy to bury people in millions of emails, and then, no one, that's not transparency. I think the Sunlight's approach that, by going to the citizens of Oakland and asking them what is the information that they want is a great place to start, and then, trying to then loop back into the departments and talk to, figure out where that data would come from, rather than, I think, the reverse, which is what, happens because governments are responsible for delivering that information. I think asking that question first is a great way to start.
Do any other commissioners have a question? And I don't believe we have anything over there. So thank you again so very much. We learned a lot.
Our next speaker is Greg Greenway, Public Affairs and Community Engagement Consultant through his firm Greenway Consulting. Mr. Greenway is partnering with the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement and Civic Leadership on a project to support effective outreach and engagement by San Francisco's Planning Department. In 2008, he designed and directed a nationally recognized project to engage residents of San Mateo County in an unprecedented dialogue about regional growth and housing. He now serves on the Public Involvement Advisory Council for Portland, Oregon, and he too should be recognized for traveling by plane to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm just going to tee this
Can
up.
we cue the slides, please?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting what you're doing. I lived in Oakland actually for many years and now split my time between Portland, Oregon and Alameda. I want to just acknowledge and appreciate people to talk to all of you as well before I turn my back to you. Before I start my presentation, let me just make a comment based on what I've heard. It might be useful for the Commission and members of the public to take a look at what Palo Alto has done with its open data platform. It includes very robust, very comprehensive, kind of proactive disclosure of all kinds of data. It has an open budget platform and an open GIS platform that makes really interesting use of Google Fusion beta tool. And I had kind of worked it into my presentation, but cut it out in the interest of time. I just wanted to make that remark. So the subject of my remarks tonight is transparency and public participation. It's a little bit different than really what all of the other speakers have covered, but I hope that it will be relevant to you. So what I will cover, what is public engagement really in the sense that describes an entire field of research and practice? What are the practical applications of it? What are the benefits and challenges? What is the connection to transparency, hence why I'm here today, and hopefully I can defend my relevance. And what can Oakland learn from others? I may use the terms public engagement, community involvement, civic engagement interchangeably. It depends on who you talk to and where you are, what the preference is. So, the starting point for public engagement, as I'll be using the term, is really the essence of democracy. And it is simply the assertion that people should have a voice in the decisions that affect them. Its essential characteristics, particularly as it would be applied by local governments, are that elected officials and staff listen to the community. In its most robust forms, it involves community members talking to one another. Dialogue is often a hallmark of good public engagement. It certainly involves early involvement before decisions are made. That is, it's not just the form of participation that matters, but the effectiveness. Participation must be meaningful. It has to be able to have some influence on the outcome of decisions. It works best when all affected and interested stakeholders and community members are involved, or at least some close approximation of that. And it certainly involves follow-up from government to the community about what happened during the process. What community engagement is not is certainly selling the community on a preferred solution, staff standing in front of the room answering questions from an audience full or not full of people. I mean, there's a time and place for that, but that's not usually what I'm talking about. It is not a process where the city controls the outcome, and this is an important point. Essentially, it's about shifting the control of the city from the outcome to the process. So the city can own the process, but it has to kind of take a leap of faith and trust that that process will lead to good outcomes, but not determine what those outcomes will be. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons it's very difficult often and challenging to get elected officials and city staff to do so, because it really involves taking your hands off the wheel. And a very important point is that it is not, in the sense that I mean it, testimony for 2 or 3 minutes at the microphone at a city council meeting or a commission meeting. That's required by law. It's valuable and important and essential. But if a city wants to make a broader commitment to community engagement and wants to actually have any possibility of involving more than a tiny fraction of your population in the public process, then we have to look beyond the city's business meetings, which is exactly what you're conducting here today, although this is a very nice and much more expansive example of that, and go beyond City Hall to reach out into the community. So So it's very useful to think about public engagement as a spectrum. And so if you look on this slide here, you can slice and dice it as finely as you want. I've done so in 4 what I'll call levels here, from informing, consulting, collaborating, and empowering. I'll explain what I mean by those in a moment. Each of these you can think of as a ladder which involves greater influence by the public over the outcome of a decision, and each of which, on the higher rung of the ladder, includes elements of the ones before it. So in the way I'm using the terms here, inform means to provide information to the public. Consult means to ask the public for input on preset decisions, preset alternatives that the city has determined ahead of time. To collaborate means to involve the public in determining what those alternatives or choices the decision makers will be faced with are in the first place. And to empower is actually to truly take your hands off the wheel and let the public solve the problem within certain guidelines set by the city, certain budget guidelines or other parameters. And so which level of engagement you choose depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Purpose determines process. You inform the public when you want to help the public understand an issue. You consult the public when you want to determine how the public feels about an issue. You collaborate when you want to partner with the public to come up with alternatives, or when you value what the public can bring to the table in terms of thinking about potential solutions. And you empower the public when you're ready to give up power and let the public actually make the decisions. So within this kind of a framework, once you determine your goal, that implies a particular level of engagement, which in turn then points you to particular kinds of techniques and tools that you would use to implement. So for example, if your goal is to inform, you might use tools like fact sheets, website, open houses, newsletters, expert panels, technical reports, things like that. If you're consulting, public comment at the business meeting is a good form of input, but focus groups, surveys, comment forms, interviews, deliberative polls, there's a whole range of ways to consult the public as well. When you collaborate, you might use workshops, task forces, advisory groups, charrettes, appreciative inquiry processes, world cafes. There's a universe of possibilities for that. And when you empower citizens to actually make decisions, there are kind of more sophisticated techniques of citizen juries. You can certainly use ballots and various forms of decision-making delegation. So the point I want to make here is that there truly is a universe of possibilities out there, and there's a huge community of practitioners who do research and who do this kind of thing. And it's really a question of what you're trying to accomplish that leads you to decide which of these various tools that you want to use. And it's much more important to start with the strategy and be purposeful about it than to start with the tools and make them fit the job. And so this wonderful slide filled with words that you can't read, I put up there only to acknowledge that this kind of a framework that I've laid out here was pioneered by a group called IAP2, the International Association for Public Participation. And as you can sort of see, they slice it into 5 categories of different kinds of participation. Engagement with increasing levels of citizen influence, each of which corresponds to a particular goal, a particular promise that you're making to the public, and then various tools that fit the bill. I won't go into detail here, but just wanted to sort of show you some broad categories that are the focus of a lot of work in this field. So there's people who work on all these kinds of things, and these are all various rich fields of research and practice related to public engagement. So where does it apply? Well, particularly in the context that I'm talking about here and might be relevant for Oakland, some of the obvious ones are in planning processes, general plans, area plans, development project proposals, budgeting, anytime you want to bring the community in to decisions about where to spend the money. City commissions and boards as a special form of participation, how you recruit those, what their charges, etc. And I probably should have added ordinances. Any significant legislation that will affect a lot of people is good grounds for public engagement. Remember, Oakland being so tropical. So, what are the benefits of public engagement? So aside from its obvious relationship to democracy, what are the kind of very practical benefits for the city, particularly from the city's point of view? The first I'd argue is you end up with more credible and legitimate decisions. Okay? When people feel that their voice is heard, when they can see in a transparent way how the city is inviting them to participate and how that voice is going to be used to influence or at least inform decisions by policymakers, it engenders trust and buy-in in what the city's doing, and the public's much more likely to cut slack to policymakers and work with the city. It gives you more durable decisions. I mean, think, for example, about how easy it is through CEQA to challenge an EIR. I've worked a lot in Redwood City, and one of the things I'm most proud of right now is their downtown precise plan, which is indeed very successful. It's brought all kinds of development proposals for exactly the vision that they have for downtown. But after the city council approved that, the precise plan, it was held up for 2+ years by a single property owner who argued that the EIR hadn't taken into account shadows on his particular property effectively. He won that challenge. They had to redo the EIR, and 2 years later they have the successful plan in place. But that's a loss of time and a loss of resources that might have been avoided, think about it in the general sense, if that property owner had been engaged early on in a different way. Third, you end up with more cost-effective implementation and fewer missteps. I mean, I would argue that even as it costs resources to do good public engagement, you end up with fewer missteps, that you don't have to redo processes if you get them right the first time. And there's a notion that if you go slowly to go fast later on, the public engagement involving all stakeholders earlier in the process, making sure that you vet a decision adequately and that everyone who is interested or affected has their say early on, that gives you a better chance of moving most efficiently with limited resources. And fundamentally, you end up with better decisions. That is because, for a couple of reasons. Staff in the city doesn't know everything. Particularly, say, when you're working on a neighborhood plan, or you're thinking about where to spend money in particular parts of the city. There's community wisdom and knowledge about how things work that should be brought to the table and can inform policymakers' decisions. Similarly, there's creativity and talent out there in the community that can be tapped, like Enable Oakland does. You bring ideas to the table. You let citizens help to set the agenda, and you have hackathons and things like that to suggest better ways of doing things. So the city lets go of the notion that it has all the expertise. And finally, public engagement is always an opportunity for community building, for building civic capacity, to increase the ability of the community to participate further in the next iteration of a public process. And a really good test of the city's public engagement strategy in a particular case is whether, when the city reaches out and touches the community, whether it leaves it stronger for having done so. And all of these things, of course, are of very practical benefit potentially for the city. Oh, I wish I had my handkerchief. In the interest of time and sort of keeping this positive, I'll only highlight the first challenge here that I have on my list, which is a lack of mutual trust. There can be a history of bad experiences on either side of the dais, from the city's point of view and from the community's point of view. Any elected official who's been around long enough, any city staffer who's had to go out into the community on a contentious or difficult issue, has had the experience of just being pilloried in public and being having the best of intentions, but feeling like they got sideswiped and never want to go out into the public again. Likewise, community members who've gone through long processes and felt like the effort that they expended didn't make any difference in the end, or that a process that was claimed to be transparent wasn't in fact what it was claimed to be, is going to have a long memory of that. And so there's always the challenge of kind of overcoming the memories of frustration and difficulties and wasted time. And that's always going to be a challenge. So how does this relate to transparency? Well, think about before going public, meaning you design a strategy and you're going to go out and execute it. But before you go to the public, it's critical to be, and before you begin to engage the public, it's critical to be transparent about a number of things. First would be, what is truly the scope of potential public influence over a decision? I mean, the public can't control everything, and when you invite them to participate, you're not inviting them to have influence over all aspects of a decision. There are budget parameters, time parameters, sometimes legal constraints. So it's very important to be transparent when you ask people to be involved and ask them for their time about what it is that they can influence. It's important also to be transparent about the design and timing of the process itself. Here's the strategy we have. It begins at time A, it ends at time B, and these are all the kinds of meetings and events and opportunities that we're going to have in the design of this process. Within that process, it's critical to say how people can participate effectively. What are the entry points? What are the opportunities for influence? How can you have your voice heard, and how will it be recorded? Transparent about information necessary for informed participation. I mean, this really connects to everything else that folks have talked about this evening. You know, you must make available the information to be transparent about how it can be accessed. And now we're not talking sort of in a general platform sense for the city as a whole, but in relation to a particular engagement process, a particular issue. Because again, for participation to be meaningful, for people particularly to deal with complex issues, complicated issues, controversial issues, issues that are outside of the scope of what they do in their ordinary life, but that will affect them, they can't participate effectively unless they have information. And sometimes that information is not just raw data, but it's information that the city, in fact, has to very carefully frame so that it's appropriate and useful for that particular decision and the public's participation. So you go through a process, well designed, you let the community be involved, they've given their input. Transparency is also critical after that point in a number of ways. You must be transparent about what the community said during the process. That is, you have to respond or reflect back to the public what it was that you heard through responsiveness summaries, progress reports, etc. The public needs to know how you've interpreted and heard them so that they have an opportunity to correct it. You must be transparent about how the community input was conveyed to policymakers. It's one thing to summarize everybody's input correctly. It's another to actually provide it in a timely way to policymakers so they can take it into account in making their decisions. It's important to be transparent about then how that input actually affected the outcome, how it affected the decision. And this primarily is on the elected officials. And it frankly is probably the hardest thing to accomplish because elected officials have the prerogative of making decisions. They're not necessarily required, they're certainly not required to explain how the public input affected their decisions. But it's a very important part of transparency in a public engagement process. And it's exactly where transparency connects to accountability. And finally, in terms of evaluation, the city should be transparent about what it learned from the process and how it would change or anything similar in the future. So I would love to talk to you about this case study, Threshold, where we used community dialogue to really build support for affordable housing in San Mateo County, where there was a great lack of support. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. I might only suggest, though, a completely different point that I had planned to make initially, which is that we learned how different people's conclusions can be when you put them in a well-designed process compared with when the only way for them to have input is in the city's business meeting. And the long story short, the problem here was that the county of San Mateo and all of the 20 jurisdictions within it collectively were not building nearly enough housing or affordable housing to meet the need. Primarily that was because people who would come to the city's business meeting were those who lived in the neighborhood and were concerned about traffic, new people, changing character of the community, etc. And that's who elected officials heard from, and that's why they didn't approve enough housing. And when we designed a process over a period of a year to put them in well-designed, facilitated small group dialogue with appropriate information to consider their options, they began to radically different conclusions, which illustrated a number of things, but certainly at the core the value of well-designed community dialogue. And so the point I make perhaps now is relevant that I hadn't thought to make until tonight, was that that might be a useful model or approach to actually think about what kinds of transparency policies would be appropriate for the city of Oakland, what kinds of open data or data access policies might be appropriate for the city of Oakland to in fact use the strategy of community engagement and what we know about community engagement to engage around that topic. So I would love to talk to you about our San Francisco project too, but I'm going to leave some time for questions and focus on the city of Portland because I think that's probably most relevant for where Oakland's at. And that's because the story of public engagement in Portland is a story of building institutions citywide and trying to embed consistent practices in a very institutionalized way. So what happened in Portland, Portland's a city with a culture of participation, decades and decades of participation. They love process there. They embrace it. But over a period of time, particularly within the community, there was lots of frustration about a lack of consistency in the way that the city approached public involvement. They call it community involvement there. And particularly the way that it did so across bureaus, which is what they call departments in the city there. And so in 2003, beginning in 2003, there was a convening of a number of joint city community committees to talk about how to achieve more consistency and better deploy the city's resources. The result of that, the primary result of that, was the recommendation that the city form a standing committee or commission that would be responsible for recommending best practices and giving resources and support to all the bureaus in the city around public engagement. And that body that was established in 2008 is called the Public Involvement Advisory Council, the PEC, we call it. And one of the most interesting things I find about this, so I've never served on a commission like this before, is that it has almost equal participation from city staff and community members. And that's not city staff staffing the commission, but it's city staff serving as co-equal members of the commission along with community members and representing lots of different bureaus. And there are about 32 members, I think, of the commission now. One of the things that came out of, one of the early recommendations that came out of PIAC's work was that the city adopt basic principles, commitment, if you will, around community involvement. And indeed, the City Council did so in 2010, adopted a set of public involvement principles, which really, like I say, sort of represented leadership's commitment to the notion of community involvement, to public engagement. The work that we're doing now is centered on, there's a lot of stuff going on within PIAC, but one of the things I'll highlight is work on the city's comprehensive plan, which is essentially the equivalent of California's general plans. And Chapter 1 of the Comprehensive Plan, which corresponds to State Planning Goal 1, is the Community Involvement Chapter. And so we just finished drafting what I think is extremely comprehensive and pretty impressive piece of work that involves a set of goals and a large number of policies around public engagement, which, if adopted next year by City Council, will then take on the force of law, essentially translating those early principled commitments from City Council, from leadership, into something that has legal force, which actually institutionalizes those principles. So these are the principles. Each of these comes with an explanation and a set of indicators for what you should see if you're doing this well, and anticipated outcomes if they're enacted. And just at a very practical level, some of PIAC's accomplishments are really things that I think are relevant to a city like Oakland, to any city really. I'll share with you kind of concrete examples of ways to implement this work. The first is, and this has been adopted by City Council, it exists and it's practice now, is a public involvement impact statement for city council actions, called the FIPIS. It used to be the FIS, fiscal impact statement. And like many cities, Portland files for every action that it takes, every legislative action that council takes, a fiscal impact statement. They did that much earlier. Well, they added into this the PI, the public involvement. So now that form, in addition to asking questions about fiscal impact, actually asks a series of questions for every council action about how the public was involved and how that involvement influenced the decision. And so that form actually literally gets filed with every action. That's maybe 1,200 or so city council actions each year, and it's something obviously that is accessible to the public. The second thing is a public involvement baseline assessment for bureaus. The PIAC wanted to know how all the different departments of the city handle public involvement. Do they have dedicated public engagement officers? Some of the bureaus do, many of them don't. Do they use their website? Do they have a stated policy for how they engage the public? Do they have a guideline for practices for their staff, et cetera? And that was very useful information, particularly if you think about it from the standpoint that a couple of other speakers mentioned earlier of PIAC's role of supporting staff to do what they want to do well, which is good public engagement, and not just the notion of kind of holding them accountable, but helping them to be accountable because they need the tools to do so. Well, the first step in doing that is to assess current practice. Another accomplishment of PIAC, another thing that they worked on over the last couple of years were guidelines for bureau budget advisory committees. Every bureau, every department has a budget advisory committee. This is a citizen commission board, very much like boards and commissions here. And it turned out that the way that those BACs, the budget advisory committees, function was very haphazard. How people were recruited, who served on them, what their role was in relation to the Bureau, et cetera. And so this group developed over a period of really 3 years a set of recommendations to standardize the way that those budget advisory committees work with their bureaus, and it was adopted by council last year. And finally, going forward, the work of this group will primarily be to develop the resources to help staff implement the comprehensive plan policies once that they're adopted. And so wrapping up here, sort of the lessons, if I would summarize them from the city of Portland, were that early collaboration between the city and the community laid the groundwork for this process that eventually, I believe, will end with a very strong institutionalization of policies to support proactive and comprehensive public engagement throughout the city. There was, interestingly, a recovery of outcomes of previous processes. I said the Portlanders love process. One of the things you learn is that people get tired of being asked the same questions over and over. We just the Portland plan, we just did that a few years ago, and then we did Engage Portland. And, they don't want to be asked the same questions. They want to know what happened to the answers that got put on the shelf that they gave 5 or 6 years ago. And so part of that process between 2003 and 2007 was gathering the information that had already been gleaned from the community, lessons that had already been learned, and bringing them and making them current and alive. The systematic approach, I think, is one that's worth looking at, sort of moving from assessment to developing general principles at the level of leadership, and then in various ways translating that into law. And finally, as I mentioned before, the importance of tools and resources to support staff. It's one thing to say we're going to do it. It's one thing to want to do it. It's an entirely different thing to know how to do it and then to be able to do it. And so that's another role that PIAC itself has, being an institution within the city, to try to drive that forward. In my last slide here, just in the most general sense, the broadest lessons I've learned from looking at lots of different cases of public engagement, the basic ingredients for success. All of these words are obviously broad and straightforward and simple, but they're critical. You can't, certainly on a citywide level, consistently change the way that the city does public engagement without a very firm commitment from your city council, period. And that's why it was so important in Portland that council adopted principles, because then the expectation was that the next city council member and the next mayor would honor those principles that had been adopted previously. You need resources. I said it's more efficient, you save time in the long run, but the truth is to do public engagement well costs much more, takes much more time, and takes much more staff capacity than to do what's minimally legally required. You need to build relationships with the community, and those are not relationships that are built just around a particular plan, project, or budget decision, but those are ongoing relationships that, obviously a city like Oakland has really good relationships with much of its community, but it's critical to use those relationships for public engagement, to give small grants, for example, to help build community capacity if you really want people to be involved, to help them be involved, to help remove barriers to participation, to use your community members as facilitators, to use community leaders and community organizations as liaisons to reach out and actually bring people to the table, because it's no good to design a process if nobody shows up. And so those kinds of relationship building is really at the heart of it. And then the easy part is the skills. I mean, so often folks want to start with the skills and say, what are the tools? Give me the tools so that I can use them. But it's really these other things that lay the foundation for being able to use the skills. And then that's the easy part. Staff can be trained, the capacity can be built to serve as partners, and you can always find practitioners in the field who will point you in the direction of sort of cutting edge and useful techniques. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned quite a great deal through that. I want to start and see if there's any commissioners that have any questions. Go right ahead.
I apologize for monopolizing the mic, but I have an important question. It sounds like you've worked for a number of cities that have done great things as far as their community involvement. How much has that cost per city? Do you have an average cost for increasing community involvement? I know that we can leverage resources without any sort of baseline expenditures, but did these cities spend some money in developing their community involvement? And if so, generally, what are we talking about?
Sure. So I've never worked as city staff, only worked either as a nonprofit director or as a consultant to cities. I mean, it really depends what you want to do, and it can range from not very expensive at all to, take the case of the city of Portland, to making a citywide commitment to staffing, for example, that commission, and putting all the resources in that it requires to comply with the public impact statement, for example. So it's kind of a hard question to answer. I mean, I guess the way I would want to answer it is that you can make a lot of progress with relatively little money by reorienting your approach to public engagement. For example, for the city to adopt a set of principles, a commitment from leadership to good public engagement costs essentially nothing. And yet that sort of points the city on the path, and I would say is a precondition for everything else. Staffing, just take the Portland example. Creating a permanent commission whose charge it is to give some thought to what's going on with the city and how capacity can be built and skills can be improved, costs as much as it costs to staff it. And in the case of Portland's PIAC, there's it's the Whitney approach. There's one staff member within the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, and that person does tremendous work. And then everyone else is a volunteer. So all those other 32 people who serve on the commission, whether they be staff members or a community member like myself, they're giving their time, and we give lots of time to lots of committees and subcommittees and work groups and so forth. And so to kind of lay all that groundwork, I think, is relatively inexpensive. When you want to, on the other hand, design a very large-scale public engagement around a particular issue, that's when you'll start spending money. Because you first of all want people to come, and so you need to have an outreach plan. You need to have all that communication that it requires and the time it requires to go tell people what you're going to do and persuade them to give you their time and participate. And then you want all of the meetings you hold have a certain cost, the facilitators, communication materials, and all that. So I think, in a sense, to lay the foundation and to create the structure and the institutions is relatively inexpensive. It's then to implement it on a case-by-case basis, time and time again, where it starts to take real money, and I couldn't even begin to kind of generalize about what that cost would be. How's that for
I think that's an important comment. I think that's something that we definitely need to recognize, because The city of Oakland does have issues with resources, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't lay the foundation in order to get the structure in place so that we can be a much more transparent city. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, consistency, for example, assessing what you do now and trying to bring some consistency and share lessons learned or best practices even within the city. You know, this department does this very well, another department does something else very well. How can everyone, even within the city, leverage the resources and knowledge that already exists within the city? I think you can get a long way with that on a relatively low budget.
Thank you so much. Is there any further questions from the commission? Sheila, I believe we have some tweets.
These are more comments rather than questions. A lot of our online participants noticed that Oakland, based on what Mr. Greenway has said in his remarks, is doing a lot of things that it shouldn't. And they're really interested in how the Ethics Commission and other governmental bodies are, what their plans are for increasing awareness, public participation, and attendance at monthly meetings.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation.
I received the same question on a handwritten card from our audience, and it's what is our commission's plan to increase our own transparency, specifically to increase awareness and attendance at its monthly meetings. Well, I'm hoping that tonight is an example of how we have done that, at least for this particular hearing. So I'm really excited to see all of the participation. But also, we're making a lot of changes to our website, and so I encourage people to go on and see what you're able to find. One of the pieces is an open government portal to provide more information to people in one place about what kinds of other commissions are meeting and when. We're trying to link up to a lot of the other city resources. So I encourage you to go there. And really, I pose this question back to everyone who's listening. I think this is another great opportunity for all of you to comment. What more do you want? What can we be doing? What do you need more from our commission? What would encourage you to join the discussion, to watch on TV as we meet monthly and engage? We could incorporate some more of the text as in typo features if that's something that would be helpful, to know that your input is actually being received and that there are avenues for you to be able to comment on what's being discussed at the meetings. I think that's absolutely something we could explore. I don't know if other commissioners have any thoughts or responses. Feel free. Do we need a 7-minute stretch, or are we just going to power through? All right, power through. Nicole Nedich is our next speaker. She is Online Engagement Manager for Oakland City Administrator's Office. That's a relatively new role created inside city government that allows her to focus on engaging citizens to participate more in city government through the use of innovative technology and strategic design. Ms. Nedich brings a wealth of experience as a community organizer, programmer, designer, artist, arts administrator, and entrepreneur. She is interested in harnessing the power of strong creative and tech communities in Oakland to help the city be more efficient, transparent, and participatory. Thank you for staying and being here.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Commission. Ms. Chair Baker. Thank you for the community who's come out to hear this. I'm excited to share some of the work that the City of Oakland has been doing on this front of transparency and participation and how we're using technology to enable government to be more effective. I'll be the first one to say that we still have a long ways to go, but we are moving forward. And I think that I was really, struck by Tim O'Reilly's statement earlier that, it happens slowly and then all of a sudden it happens really quickly, because I think that we are sort of in that position right now where we've been making steady progress and now things are starting to move pretty quickly. So if we could switch to the slides. So like most government agencies facing diminished resources, we just talked about that, the City of Oakland can no longer afford to do business as usual. Over the past 10 years, the city has lost nearly a quarter of its staff. Yet residents and business owners increasingly expect a more transparent, participatory, and responsive government. People expect immediate responses because that's what they've grown accustomed to. You can buy plane tickets on your phone or watch movies instantly online. You can even see how the flu is spreading across the world through Google. But you still can't find basic public services and information online. We recognize that there's a big digital divide, not only socioeconomically, but here between the public sector and the private sector. And it's evident every time you have to stand in line at the DMV or look for something on a government website. Our bureaucratic processes are often complex, paper-based, labor-intensive, and linear. Bureaucracy has evolved with the goal of protecting public resources, ensuring accountability, and maintaining public trust. However, after many years and layers of revisions and added policies, our systems have become so costly, so complex, and so cumbersome that the public is frustrated with the slow pace of government. Our arduous processes have ended up causing the reverse effect on trust and on accountability. Open government initiatives have sprung up all over the country and the world to help get us back on track. The cities that are really moving forward with these initiatives are ones that have a coordinated push by city leaders, by city staff, and by the community to help accelerate the progress. It takes an investment of time and resources to open up and become more transparent, and the City of Oakland is dedicated to making that investment. Over the past few years, we have worked to improve access to public information. We've developed tech and tools that increase transparency and allow us to better engage with our community. The first one that we did was we consolidated all of our agency websites into one site design, look, and feel, so that there's one voice coming out of the city. You go there now and it looks like a pretty static page, and we're aware of that. But it was a huge step for the City of Oakland to go from all of these various different websites that were set up, when it was time to create a website for each agency into one site design, look, and feel. We've launched multiple social media initiatives designed to engage residents, businesses, and visitors and deliver information to people where they want to see it. We've integrated our website with email and texting capabilities to provide alerts when content changes on our site or there's an important message that we want to get out quickly. We've launched EngageOakland.com, an online engagement platform where we can ask direct questions to our community and get feedback on a variety of issues. We've launched an open data platform to give people access to raw data that the city collects, providing increased transparency and driving innovation outside of City Hall by people and technology that want to tap into the data. And there was a question posed earlier on how can you submit data sets and things that you would like the city to publish. Actually, if you go to data.oaklandnet.com, there's a link at the bottom of the page that says suggest a data set. We've applied for and became a 2013 Code for America City, and we're working with 3 skilled fellows, including Sheila here, with backgrounds in design, tech, and public policy to increase transparency and access to information through a new public records request system. We've also established a working group internally that's looking at policies and procedures around public records requests. And now we're working on a new website that's going to make it easier to find information and allow us to be more dynamic, automate more, and tie all of these different platforms together for a seamless user experience. We're trying to align our communications efforts across departments and programs. In addition, we've worked offline with our local Code for America Brigade, Open Oakland, to increase civic engagement by tapping into the amazing tech community that we have in the East Bay. In the past year, we've co-hosted 2 hackathons, the City Camp, several meetups, and a write-a-thon, as well as worked on projects of varying scope with Open Oakland each Tuesday night in City Hall. By working with the community, we're able to increase our capacity and gain valuable insights into their needs. On June 1st, we worked with Open Oakland to launch Oakland Answers, a new resource that helps people find information and services online quickly. Oakland Answers is an incredible example of how city staff and the community can collaborate to develop a tool that will benefit everyone. We had 70 community members and staff attend an all-day write-a-thon to answer commonly asked questions. By collaborating on this tool, we were able to get an incredible amount of work done in a day and launch a new resource for the city in under 2 weeks. Oakland Answers was based on Honolulu Answers, the 2012 Code for America project, and is also a great example of how open source technologies can be leveraged across cities. So collectively, we've built a great platform for increased transparency and participation. We're excited to tap into new technologies as they emerge that give us more insight into the needs of our community and allow for more civic participation. There's been a great interest in City Hall with my colleagues to utilize these new tools and technologies, but we still have a long way to go. To truly be open, transparent, and participatory, we have to overcome some significant barriers. The momentum is there, and we're steadily moving forward. We must make access to information, communications, and public participation a priority. There's still a lot of work to be done on this front. We're working to train our staff in the tools and technologies that are available to them, empowering them to better communicate on behalf of their departments and provide more access to data and records. This may sound simple, but it can prove to be very difficult for staff that were hired on for very different purposes and have already taken on increased responsibilities as we've decreased our staff over the years. We must keep learning from our community. As new technologies arise that allow us to better connect with our community, we must be willing and nimble enough to try them out. We need to create continuous feedback loops and have our systems in place that allow us to incorporate the feedback into our systems and processes in a timely fashion. So by tapping our community for feedback and ideas right up front, we're more likely to build services and tools that the community benefits from. So for example, at the Rewrite Oakland event, one of the questions that was posed was, how do I find out about internship opportunities within the city of Oakland? This seems like a very simple question that we should be able to answer very quickly and simply. But it's always been done by the particular department or program that's looking for internship opportunities. So the answer is actually not a simple one. You have to know who's offering them, you have to know what you're interested in, and then you have to go search that out online. But by just having a community member ask that question to us, we realized that that was something that we weren't doing very well. It was letting people know about internship opportunities. And it gives us a pathway to move forward in order to be more clear about that. We also must broaden our network. So we have 650 active participants on Engage Oakland, 830 followers on Twitter, 6,500 likes on Facebook. We're receiving over 10,000 service requests per year through SeeClickFix, which has made our service requests rise by 25%. And we have over 15,500 subscribers to our email text alert notification systems. Collectively, these numbers add up to 33,480 users. And if that was taken singularly, like these people didn't have multiple accounts on multiple platforms, that would only make up about 9% of our population. Those numbers seem high I've looked at other cities and we're doing pretty good, but we can do much better than that. We need to figure out how we can communicate to more of our residents. And we must redesign service processes. So this is something that's been talked about quite a bit today, but it's really just easy to say, let's open up all of our data. But if the processes aren't there in order to support that, it makes it very difficult. So Karen Jan, Deputy City Attorney, is she still here? Has been working to bring design thinking into City Hall. And we're implementing this as a tool to rethink service delivery. Redesigning our service process is a critical step in becoming a more open and transparent city. Looking at the design of our services brings together city staff from different areas and departments to dissect existing processes and determine more efficient models of doing business. This ultimately leads to better services, better technology, better data, and a breakdown of silos. And we must be willing to take risks and make some mistakes along the way. This one is the hardest one for government to overcome. Public sector workers are generally more risk averse than private sector employees, and rightfully so. We have to be careful and diligent to protect the public's interest and privacy, but we cannot remain stagnant. Code for America has taught us a lot this year about delivering the minimum viable product, or the MVP. It's a business strategy targeted at avoiding building products that customers do not want. But this means stepping away from our legacy systems and being comfortable with taking risks, both of which are difficult for government employees who are constantly under so much public scrutiny. We're a long way from this. We have to accept that we may never be done. We're a long way from being fully open and transparent, and we may never get there.
As technology gets smarter and feedback is expected instantly, we're going to have to change and adapt. Now, with 95% of America's teenagers online, a quarter of them using their cell phones as the primary web device, and with an average teen sending out or receiving over 100 text messages a day, our next generation of civically engaged residents is not going to want to wait 10 days to receive a public records request, or wait in line and be redirected to several different physical locations to get a business tax license. When Oakland Sunshine Ordinance was passed, we were at the forefront of government transparency and accountability. I think we're still at the forefront, and we're moving swiftly towards transparency. But as I said before, we still have a long way to go. We're thinking about how we can better improve our city. We have a committed administration, we have committed leadership, and with the community and the Public Ethics Commission support, and this is really important, it takes everybody's support. In defining our goals, we can be a national leader moving forward. The ultimate goal would be that we no longer have to use the term open government, because government inherently would be open. In the future, all documents, records, data, and information will be available online and wherever you are. But we are getting there. It's going to take a little bit of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful to see all the work that you've done, Nicole. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? I'm going to have Commissioner Farnham go, and then I'll have you go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. You've highlighted just how much you've been doing and how busy you've been, and I know you've been doing a lot. But you probably need help. And I know you've reached out and had a lot of engagement with the community and worked with Open Oakland and other groups to get some help, to figure out what, help develop tools and just increase public engagement. What's the best way to do that? What advice would you give to groups, people, individuals, people who want to help, who want to work on tools, whether it's technology tools or similar to the write-a-thon, where they're helping compile information that might be available? What would you say to them? How do they get involved? How do they get started?
Well, I think that there's a lot of engagement opportunities out there, Open Oakland being one of them, that happens every Tuesday night, and I know that we're going to hear a little bit more about that in a moment. There's also a lot of other meetings, town hall meetings, NCPC meetings, all volunteer opportunities, all kinds of things that you can do. And while I realize that we could make it easier for people to find these things on our website and through social media, they are there. So I would say that that's the first step, is to really reach out and see what's available, what meets your interest, and figure out what works with your schedule in order to be able to participate. I think that there's a lot of interest around the civic hacking movement, which is really great, but civic hacking can be done by not just technologists, and I think that's something that's starting to be seen, but it's going to become more apparent soon. So the write-a-thon Open Oakland hosted on June 1st was a great example of that. You didn't have to have any technical experience at all. You just had to have a want and a desire to make Oakland a better place to live and come out and answer some questions, help answer some questions.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Nicole. We've had the opportunity to work together a bunch of times, and you've been an incredible partner, an incredible leader, and a lot of this excitement and work that's being done in the city. I think a lot of credit goes to you in making this happen. I think just recently with the Oakland Answers event, that was an exciting event for me to see, where there was a lot of enthusiasm. City staff were excited about about what was going on, and Sid Harrell gave an amazing presentation about user-centric design, which I thought was a great moment for thinking about design not just being something where you make a website look pretty or make something look nice, but think about its use, the utility, what will the end user, what will the citizen be experiencing, and when thinking about solving problems, considering the end user. So there's been a lot of amazing work, but actually you said a few things that I want to maybe explore a little bit more. You mentioned the working group. Is this something that is this something that the results of this work group, is this going to be made public at some point, or is this an internal document?
What we're primarily working on right now is administrative instructions that would guide how we respond to public records requests. So that is an administrative document. It can be made available to the public, but it's not necessarily a public document. We're looking at the policies and the procedures around how we respond to public records requests, and then we're also looking at the technology that we use and the tools that we have in order to respond to those public records requests, making sure that we're aligning our staff resources with what's needed in order to be able to respond quickly and efficiently.
But that makes sense. But I would like to see a sense of how the next few years are going to look, some sort of roadmap. If it's not this, then something else, just to give us a sense of where. There's a lot of things going on, but where do we expect to be in a year or two?
Well, I think that one of the primary things that we're looking at right now is in this access to information, sort of what kinds of information do we collect as a city? When we start to look at it as the types of information and less about the departments that collect certain kinds of information, it starts to become clearer what the overall, what our overall portfolio, I guess, is of data and information that we have. So looking at it as, internship opportunities or board and commission meetings, or records, or questions and answers, like with Oakland Answers, then we're able to start to culminate those from all of the different agencies within the city and create a resource that's easily searchable, easily, you can find the information a little bit better. So that's primarily what we're working on right now, and I think that we're going to see the results of that, iteratively throughout the course of the year. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of.
And so as far in the overall themes, I guess, of the public records request database is that people make these requests all the time, and typically we respond to each request, through an email or something like that. But what this would actually do is make it available to the public to see, so that before you even have to make a public records request, you could actually search and find out whether or not somebody has already made that public records request. And it would also make it very transparent as far as how long it took us to respond to the public records request, who it was routed to within the city, and the documents that were made available.
Okay.
Is that it?
Well, actually, so there's a little bit more to that. So in terms of, so that's an immediate project, but in terms of just a vision, maybe just a vision of where things are going in the next few years, because I think that this, for example, Oakland Answers, in terms of what will be the long-term strategy for maintaining this. So just a sense of how I think we can institutionalize a lot of the successes that we've had to make sure that they continue to support it into the future. Just know that there is, or even if they're not going to be supported into the future, but for that to be clear and for the public to just know what the city is thinking and what their plan is.
Yeah, so with Oakland Answers, we're really looking at integrating it into the way that we answer questions throughout the city. We have all kinds of questions that come into the city on a regular basis through our Oaklanders Assistance Center, through our call centers, and through the various numbers that we publish on a regular basis of how you can connect with city staff. So we're looking at this as being the primary database where we would store the questions and answers for the city. So as new questions get answered, they would be made available online. So that's one way. I mean, I think that under the records and the data, it's similar goals. First we have to show people what is available. We have these tools, we have these resources available, We have to work on our processes so that the data is actually something that we can publish in some cases. In some cases, or a lot of cases, things are still a very paper process. They're being collected, information is being collected on paper, and it's not always being digitized. And so, just those kinds of steps are huge steps that we are making and we're working on making in order to be able to release more data. And then looking at how data talks to each other across different various platforms. So we have all of these platforms within the city, but what can we do to sort of string these platforms together and allow them to talk to each other so that we have richer data and richer analysis, so that we can move towards something like the LouisSat program that was talked about earlier.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Furman.
Thank you. I think as a follow-up to Commissioner Tejeda's question, or could be related, has there been any thought to some kind of advisory committee that not necessarily, we don't want to add to your job responsibilities in terms of laying out a 5-year roadmap. You have other things to do, maybe shorter term, but that may be an advisory committee. I guess that's maybe an old-fashioned word for it, but maybe some other type of process that would lay out a 5-year plan, a longer-term plan, and some goals. Has there been any conversations within city government about that?
Yeah, there has been quite a few conversations about that, and I think that we haven't completely fleshed out that idea yet. I do see something on this end being something that we could experiment on a more collaborative. I think Open Oakland's been a really great advisory committee in a way towards some of these efforts, and so figuring out ways where we can collaborate more, I think is something that we're all very interested in, and then a more structured advisory committee is certainly something that's been talked about.
Any further questions from the commissioners? Quickly, how many staff do you have?
Zero. I'm part of a 3-person communications team that does citywide communications for the city, and I look at online engagement and how we communicate online.
Thank you. I believe we might have some texts. Adam, is that true? Sure. Thank you.
Let's see. A new one that came in, and I think we've heard this said out loud also. It says, we have transparency laws, but no one who violates them ever faces meaningful consequences. Another repeat of sentiment, hire more staff in the Public Ethics Commission. And the last one, encourage efforts to proactively engage underserved communities through nonprofits and churches. Publish your efforts and results on data.oaklandnet.com.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I've been listening quietly and taking notes. There is a budget hearing on Thursday. There are 2 proposed budgets. One of them maintains the additional staff for the Ethics Commission that was in my original budget, and the other one doesn't. So you have a chance to weigh in. We're also still looking for an IT director, and I believe that we've had 2 that we've lost, literally after going through really hard searches, and I believe that when we finally get one, I'm trying to offer the last candidate a little bit more money to see if the city council will approve it, because it's been very tough. And then when we do that, I'm hoping that there will be a broader level of advisory groups for different issues.
Thank you so much, Mayor Kwan. We have one more scheduled speaker, and we have one more unofficial speaker.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Actually, there's a budget proposal that has more public ethics staff than your original budget proposed. I just want to clarify that. And also, there are not 2 budget proposals, but because we've had an iterative process, we've now had 6. In fact, the last one just got emailed 2 hours ago. We now have 6 budget proposals because of the new transparency. So I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you so much for comments. We will have open forum after the final speaker. So if you would like to speak, please submit your speaker comment card to Lauren, who's in the front, and we will make some time available at the end. So we'd like to really give some respect for our final speaker, who's been waiting for quite a long time. And I will let Whitney introduce him. Thank you.
And that is Steve Spiker, Director of Research and Technology at the Urban Strategies Council, where he works closely with community groups to help them develop and implement IT solutions to meet their unique organizational needs. He has experience in criminal safety and justice, economic development, housing issues, health, and the application of GIS and other technologies to these issues. In August 2012, Mr. Spiker co-founded Open Oakland, a volunteer Code for America brigade. And if you haven't already heard, it's a group of technologists supporting open government, open public data, and civic innovations in Oakland city government. Welcome, Mr. Spiker.
Y'all doing okay? More awake than me then. Thanks for the chance to speak tonight. First clarification necessary, Open Oakland is not just technologists. We have all kinds of awesome people as part of our movement as well. So I just want to clarify that, which means anyone's welcome to participate. This time, all of you downstairs. Okay, so I'm going to be quick. I'm going to attempt to be quick, because you all know I'm going to talk long. So Open Oakland is a group of volunteers that work to basically do what we call civic innovation, which means doing cities differently, doing cities better. We meet every Tuesday night in City Hall, and we work on problems where better technology can help, better data can help, better engagement can help. We're all about all of that. And so you're welcome to join us anytime on Tuesday evenings. So we use this term civic hacking, and it comes from a concept which is actually benevolent. Hackers are not evil. Hackers are actually people that do things for good. The term comes out of World War II, where the hackers used to rip apart aircraft and repair other aircraft in the war effort, using hacksaws to cut off pieces of an aircraft. So the term is actually a really positive term. It's being used to describe cyber criminals that do things evil. That's not us. We're about doing things that are good. So we're doing civic hacking to actually improve democracy and improve our cities. And so that just sets the tone for what Open Oakland is all about. We have a number of different projects that are really important and that relate to everything from engagement to openness and transparency in the city. Last year we ran an open government pledge where we required all the city council candidates and city attorney candidates to actually sign up and say that they buy into the idea of open data. 4 of the 6 people elected in that election actually signed this pledge, and so we have some good support going forward that we are definitely going to be working with to make sure that those pledges get lived up to. So we're excited about the precedent that a lot of people coming in actually got the ideas that we're putting out there as far as what open government looks like, and Tim O'Reilly and every other presenter so far very deftly illustrated what open government means, and most of my talking points have been taken already, so you understand what it is that we're trying to do. We buy that. We've been publishing open data ourselves, both from Urban Strategies Council and then collectively as Open Oakland. We've been publishing data for about a year now. So we've had the first open data catalog in the East Bay, the first Californian one outside of San Francisco. Thank you, Jade, for a good inspiration. And then we've been doing things like Adopt a Spot program in the city, helping people to connect into ways that they can serve in small ways that mean something. I'll talk about the budget example a little bit later. It's a really exciting use case. So I want to touch on something. So this morning, how many people read the news this morning about the Ethics Commission and all that business that happened? Okay, so most of us saw that this morning. I think this is a statement from a Finnish dude about this Finnish school system and the concept that they don't have the word accountability that has really stuck with me, is that accountability is all you have left and responsibility is gone. Open Oakland is not a transparency watchdog organization. We're not the ones that are playing the gotcha game. That's not our role. We're happy that there are organizations that do that because we think they're valuable, but we're not about the accountability. We're about showing and leading in a way that actually does help people understand how open government really can look in the 21st century, show cities what open government can look like by leading the way, publishing data, doing better engagement, and supporting our local governments, because we realize that city budgets are tight. IT departments are the ones that get cut, and we see those as strategic parts of the city, as opposed to the tech guys that manage the servers that we get rid of when budgets are tight. We see that as a problem, and that means that we have a lot to offer because we understand a lot about what civic engagement and transparency really can look like from a positive angle, which leaves all the field open for anyone that wants to do the watchdog role because there's plenty of that to do in Oakland. And so we have this idea that open matters in local government. It's not just a DC thing, it's not just a President Obama's directive, it really matters. And the biggest thing that comes up time and time again when we do community engagement work at Open Strategies is that there's a massive lack of trust in government locally as well as our 9% approval rating in Congress. This is a big issue and it means a lot because every time we try and rely on government, we run up against this issue that people just don't trust what government officials and electeds are going to do what they say. That sucks. That shouldn't be how this country works. We have another issue is that government staff are aging out. We have 50 to 60% of government staff hitting retirement in the next few years, closer to 70% in the next 10 years. So we have a lot of people, capacity, skills, leaving government service in the next 5 or 10 years, which means we have to be smarter about what we're doing, and that requires us to do, the last point here is this idea of the long tail, leveraging all those resources, the expertise in our community, and it's really deep in Oakland because this is an amazing city with great people. And I think one of the pieces important that we take as a big deal, and we've learned this partly from Corporate America, is that this matters to me personally, having worked in government, private sector, and non-profit sector, is that we've really lost the idea that there is actually honour in public service. And without bringing that back, without getting back to that point where we actually accept and respect public service, all these things are going to be much harder to do because we're always going to be about tearing government down, making government officials and staff look bad, when really they're trying to do things that matter for the rest of us. We've got to change the conversation in the mainstream media about government as well, not just at a local level. And so for us at Open Oakland, engagement is a big deal, again, because of this long tail deal. If we just think that a bunch of 10 or 15 or 30 or 50 tech geeks and analysts and researchers and activists that get together in City Hall each week, if we think that we have all the answers, we're screwed collectively because we don't have all the answers. Same thing goes with city staff. Everyone that works in the city has qualifications and experience. You don't have all the answers. And so the long tail idea is that there are these small amount of people who work inside government and consultants that get paid to do things. But there's all this other capacity, and we believe that we can tap that. We don't believe that technology, like Tim said, is ever the solution. It provides access to that solution. And the technology for us is a way that we can really engage a broad swath of people, bring them in, and key to that is listen. And the biggest thing with the technology angle is what it really does for us is that it means that you can actually access people where you couldn't before. If you go to a town hall meeting, you can maybe get access to 50 to 100 people. If you're online or if you're in libraries, you can suddenly get access to the entire population. And this is something that really stands out, is that I've been in community engagement meetings with city and county officials who have said these words: I don't give a crap if you're on Facebook talking about these issues, this planning process. You're not here, you don't count. And I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that in this age. People have got to work 2 or 3 jobs to get by because we may have a living wage ordinance, but it doesn't cut it for most people because they're not getting that. And so we have families working 2 or 3 jobs, which suddenly means your voice doesn't count. And that's where the online is important, is that it provides a way for the disenfranchised communities to actually collectively raise their voice and speak into the process that happens inside City Hall. And so we use this term open source a lot within the tech sector. What it means is that you can take it and reuse it at its core, at its simplest version. I build this cool thing for you in one city, and instead of having to pay X vendor or contractor $5 million to get the same thing, I can simply hire developers to implement it without paying a license fee. And we do this a lot because we realize that that's the only way for governments to effectively scale what they're doing. Where this matters for us as far as engagement and transparency is that the project Nicole talked about, which was Oakland Answers, which is an awesome event as well as an ongoing resource for the city, is an open source piece of software. It didn't require us to hire to do an RFP process. It didn't require us to pay a lot of money to get access to the system. It required volunteers that cared about their city to spend a couple of hours building it, and then collectively a day to work on the content for the system. And that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the open source code base used to develop the application. And it really starts to matter around a lot of things for us is that when we get tighter as a city on our budget, we have to get smarter. And one of the smarter things we can consider, we don't mandate ever, we don't suggest that, but consider open source technology because it gives us a way to reduce some of our capital costs while getting access to better and more flexible technology. And so this really fits in for us as far as this whole spectrum of things that really matter. If everyone so far as public speakers have lamented how bad it is to get access to public records, a lot of this comes down to the technology that we're using inside City Hall, how old it is, how limited it is. I do a lot of public records requests, and we often hear back, say, the rent advisory board, the rent complaints board. If you make a complaint about your tenant, Your landlord, it's on paper, and the system hasn't got any data, so the department can't analyze which are the bad landlords. And so the technology does play into the transparency angle, because with the technology we have right now, we're fairly hobbled, and that's a really bad place to be when the rest of the world is Googling everything and finding everything. We can't even find our own records and data inside City Hall because we haven't turned it into data, which makes it very hard to be transparent when you can't access that information, which makes it cost a lot of money. So open budget as a great example of what happens when the city both opens up, publishes open data, and engages. So we had, for the first time, we worked with and encouraged and advocated for the city to publish the data in real machine-readable format for the first time ever. So it was open data. There was engagement because the Budget Advisory Committee worked with some of the developers on this project to actually make this make sense and make it accurate and reliable. And it was engaging because we engaged a force with the people that helped make this work for them and make it usable. And so what we ended up with is open source technology that actually made the budget visible, brought in discussions and feedback conversations within the system. It wasn't separate. Didn't have to go off to some newspaper site and talk smack about it. You could actually engage with the data, with the information live. And so this is the first time we're able to do that in Oakland, and we had some really rich conversations. This was done all by people from Open Oakland and some other organizations, and it wasn't formally sponsored by the city. But imagine when the city starts to do this kind of thing, when the budget gets formally released in this way, when the city adopts these ideas, the levels of engagement and discussion and deliberation we can get. And so when these things all connect, when we get the data, the decision making and the openness all colliding, this is what happens, or it doesn't happen. So the council members have a couple of different budget proposals on the table right now, and because there is no template for those proposals, all we have are a bunch of PDF documents that aren't comparable. We're comparing apples and fluids right now. We don't have the ability to look at the mayor's proposed budget and the other council members' proposed budgets and compare what they mean, line item to line item. Adam and his team took 16,000 lines of an Excel document and turned it into that amazing visualization because the data was open. But the other two proposals aren't in open data formats, they're not in open templates, which means that it's almost impossible to really do an accurate comparison. A couple of groups have done a lot of legwork to make some comparisons, but it's really hard, and this is why this stuff matters for the transparency angle for us all, is that as soon as information isn't digestible, you can't really make comparisons and you can't really see what government is doing, which feeds back to earlier points around you start to suddenly don't trust what government is suggesting when you can't see the numbers. And so I want to close with a couple of suggestions, a few things that we're thinking about at Open Oakland, about what we see as a future for our city, which, like Nicole, we're very excited about. We see a hell of a long way to go, but we're here and we believe that this stuff really matters, and we're willing to do a lot of work to actually make it happen. So what's key now is that we have open data flowing out of the city, and it's growing, and that's great. What we don't have, strangely, and New Orleans is the only other city in the country that has this anomaly, we don't have the policy to back that up. And so as soon as someone in the city decides that they don't like a data set that was published, it's gone. We have no way to sustain it right now, and that's a problem. So I'm urging our city councillors, we'll be meeting with them soon, to actually get solid open data legislation passed this year. We need to start doing some more proactive open government trainings. Talking about open government, saying that it matters, doesn't mean that the city council or other staff really know how to walk the walk and talk the talk. These things aren't always easy and not always built into the traditional way of doing things, like we heard from Davenport, which essentially laid out how we don't do civic engagement in Oakland. That takes a lot of capacity building of city officials and city staff to actually get to a point where that's the norm, where that's accepted, and where people are comfortable with this idea of being open by default. We think that we have to demonstrate broad engagement ourselves, which means a lot of time and effort for an all-volunteer organization. That's hard. But it means that we need to actually, if we're going to criticize and say that the city needs to be doing better broad engagement, we need to be doing the same thing as well. We've got some criticism that we haven't had a lot of traction in East Oakland, but despite knowing and having relationships with organizations across the city, what we're doing so far hasn't really had traction and seemed like it has much appeal to people across the city, and we need to work on that, and we think the city does as well, especially with adoption of new tech tools. They're just not ubiquitously access, which builds on top of this. The term digital divide is a big deal for us, but it builds even bigger when we talk about the data divide, and the ability to access information about our city becomes even more of a hindrance for equity and opportunity. And then we want to see more of our own organization and the city engaging through the data. So open data can be considered a gateway drug to civic engagement, if you want to reuse that term to death. It really does provide an amazing opportunity to get people together, talk about issues, the context, and actually put things together with factual evidence behind it, using the data as a tool to have conversations, to discuss ideas and issues. And then we think it's really important to make City Council more accessible. We have a team working on a thing called Councilmatic, which I think is a game-changing piece of technology. Again, it's not the solution. What it does is that it helps you find information about City Council meetings. Right now, if you're, say, a mother, with 2 kids and you have a dog and you care about dog parks, how do you find out about City Council meetings? Chances are there's no mechanism where you easily find out about what's happening or an issue you're concerned about. You're not really going to go to the oaklandnet.com website and look for the meetings, look for the agenda, download the PDF and search that every week to see there's an issue you care about. You're not doing that. But Councilmatic actually works like Google, again, like Oakland Answers, where it lets you put an alert in for an issue. If you care about dog parks, you can put an alert in for that. If you care about corruption and transparency, you can set that up. Or if you care about a certain neighborhood, and whenever those terms hit City Council meeting minutes and agendas, our system is going to be scraping that and turning it into data which can be acted upon. And you'll get an alert saying, you care about X issue, there's a meeting that's going to relate to that issue coming up in a week. And we think that's a massive change as far as the barriers we have to getting people involved in City Hall. We have a lot of us that come here regularly and talk all the time, but we really need a little more engagement in this to really represent our city, and we think that's a good way to do it. So the technology, again, doesn't provide the solution for us, but it allows people to access the solution, which is here in power and making things change for good. And that, we think, is going to have a big impact on our city's general attitude towards transparency, because we'll have a lot more people involved in the process, and people will be much more easily aware of what's going on. So, again, we are big on engagement. We have an ideas platform where you can submit ideas, anything you want, whether it's an idea around open government data, whether it's an idea around transparency and principles of open government. We want to hear from you, all of you, because your ideas matter. And again, even the smartest 10 people in a room aren't going to come up with all the good ideas. So we really need people to get involved in what we're doing and to contribute ideas. We're excited about taking on some campaign finance data set projects and looking at some of those things. And again, here in room 3 every Tuesday night except tonight.
Thank you so much, Steve. Do I have any questions from the commissioners? Go ahead.
For fear of keeping us all here until the next supermoon, I will keep my question very, very short. I'm interested in the idea of a standardized budget proposal. Do you have examples of a format where it just be ones and zeros to us? I mean, do you have like an Excel spreadsheet that's combined with another type of document that could be used by?
Adam, how good a template exists right now? How good a template exists right now for that?
How good? That's up to you to decide. I think it's great.
Yes, then the answer is yes, there is some form of template.
Can you send us your ideal
standardized
template?
Yes. Absolutely. And again, that for us is the advantage of taking an open source approach to our organization, is that what we do is online and freely available. So if you want a template or a tool or an app, it's all open and free to reuse, which means in Berkeley, if they want to do it, they can just copy it. And instead of them having to pay for it, it's just there.
Is that standardized template, is it because what I'm envisioning is a Word document where you compare across 2 Word documents to show the red line changes. So you have both the language differences in the budget proposals, as well as the Excel line item amount of money that's spent on particular services. Is it think along kind of the same lines, or?
So how we're working on that project is that we take the raw data comparisons and be able to visualize those 2 things side by side with that tree map kind of diagram to see exactly how big the proportions are. On top of that, it'd be really easy to do side by side comparisons of the actual text if you've got it in a consistent format, yeah. The consistency is key there. If it doesn't match, then it just takes a lot of manual effort to try and line things up. And then you need a lot of time from the budget team to make that happen. So the cleaner the data, the better the outcomes. So.
Thank you.
Any further questions? You look ready. Go for it.
I have a comment.
Please.
Quick comment. Personally, I have a foot in both camps, government and as a citizen. I serve on this commission as a citizen. I work in the Alameda County government. And I just like that you pointed out the situation with the lack of trust in politicians and the public's perception of public servants, city staff and the like, as kind of a net drag rather than a gain. And I just wanted to say that I've seen the friction on both sides. You described the friction for citizens who are working hard and want to engage but don't have enough time and need tools. And I've seen the friction on the government side where people are working hard with very few resources. So I just wanted to thank you and all the people who came tonight who are working hard and being patient and pushing Oakland City government along so that we can do what needs to be done. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Go ahead.
I look forward to using some technology tools to go back and play your speech at half speed so I can
it's late.
Get more out of it. There was a lot there, a lot of ideas that were great. Is there anything that I understand one of the goals of your organization is to create tools that Oakland or other cities can use. Is there anything that you have seen that would make it, what should Oakland be doing to better adopt some of the tools that your group either has created or is planning to create? What can they do to incorporate them, adopt them, help them, foster them?
All right, so we have another half an hour. So first thing is we need leadership that gets the technology is a strategic asset, not a bunch of geeks that fix computers. That's not what it does. So we need leadership that gets that, which means we need to actually hire a CIO finally, because that's been crippling us, because we haven't had that strong leadership that can develop a vision for what technology looks like in our city. So that's key. Yeah, try that. So that's the first thing we need, because we need people with the power to make decisions and change things that get that. So that's step one. Second is we need to actually start doing more open ideation with community organizations. So not just having a platform that lets you submit a question, a response to a certain thing, but having more broad, open debate of ideas and what we can do in the city. iMesa is a great platform out of the city of Mesa, Arizona. Weird good things can come out of Arizona, but it happened. They have a very rich discussion platform which allows people to bounce ideas back and forth. And we need to engage Oakland into a place where it's a very open ideation platform and not as restrictive. It's a great start, but it needs to be more open to really gather broader ideas. We need to form a technology commission in the city that actually helps the city with procurement decisions. Right now, the city, OPD in particular, has been burnt dozens of times with bad technology procurement decisions, and that's burning a lot of money that we don't have, and that's resulting in us getting a lot of bad software that just doesn't work for us. And I think we need to invest in capacity in the city. Essentially, what we need is a little bit like what Mike Fields has in New York City, is they have basically a data SWAT team that looks at different issues in different departments, partly from a compliance angle or from a fraud angle, but to actually thoughtfully look at data analytically and think about the data, analyze it, and make a decision from it, instead of just collecting data for administrative purposes. We need to realize that probably the biggest asset we have besides our people in the city and our cultures and facilities is the data we have in City Hall. It's hugely powerful, but we're not really doing much with it. And we need a team of people that can actually start using that more effectively across every single department, because right now we're kneecapped in our decision making and our operational awareness, because we just don't operationalize that data very well across the city. That's a pet peeve, but I think it's a critical thing where cities like San Francisco with Jay's team and others are really leading by actually doing this. We've outsourced that. We've brought technology solutions where we needed to have analysts that could understand and think about the data and respond to our needs. We've outsourced that instead of building capacity. I don't know why we do that, but that needs to change. Otherwise, we'll never build the capacity we need to do things better.
Please, go ahead.
The Commission has learned through the process of inviting guests for presentations that there are tons of data that are in paper form, in cardboard boxes, and in warehouses that are expensive. And one of the resistance to digitizing is that there are categories that don't lend themselves or offer opportunities to easily or quickly remake this data into another form. you've thought about a lot of very interesting issues, and I'm thinking about something very fundamental. How do we make data accessible if so much of it, such a large percentage, is in paper form and costs a fortune, both to find and then to scan?
Yep.
So what would the arguments be, or how would you address that conceptually? How would you address that problem?
I think conceptually the argument is, how do you really say, as a business entity, which a city really is, like Tim said, a business entity with a monopoly, you really can't operate without knowing what's happening, what's going on. That's not an okay place to be at. That's operating blind, and no business really wants to do that succeeds, but in government we can not do that and stumble along. So there's an imperative to actually know what's going on in the city. That means we need data to understand some of that and contextualize it. So that's my argument why we need to be doing it. We actually have proposed a pilot project. No one's committed formally to it, but there's tentative interest with a Berkeley-based company. It was a Corporate America accelerator called Captricity, which will automate scan PDFs and turn that into usable data in a scalable indexed form of data. So we've proposed for a project we're doing with the city and county around healthy housing conditions, because the rent complaints are paper, we're proposing that we pilot with Captricity. We get the data records as a public records request from that board. We do the scanning ourselves. We've got a good scanning system in office. Send Captricity the forms electronically, and they turn that into data, and then we can do our analysis project. The city can publish this open data, and all of a sudden that board or commission, whatever it is, can then start to look back over the last 5 years and say that, well, we're getting this one particular Oakland Housing Authority building, or a particular slumlord has gotten a huge amount of complaints because of mold or negligence, whatever it might be. Suddenly that commission is empowered to actually understand and make decisions based on information. So I'm excited about that being a pilot. I think we need to start doing that selectively. Obviously, everyone's going to raise their hand and say, me, do our data. I think we have to do that and show that there's value in what's there for both research purposes, for policy making, and for community empowerment. If people don't know that one particular landlord's a problem, then they can't act. Or they don't have the data to back up their arguments. So that's one approach.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the commission? This is our last speaker. Do we have any tweets or texts that we would like to contribute?
2 comments. One of our participants pointed out to Spike that the Open Oakland meetings happen at the exact same time as some of the city council meetings, and you're potentially turning some people away because of that. And also, just to sort of summarize a lot of the tweets that have been coming in, people are very excited about what's been going on with Open Oakland and some of the projects in the city administrator's office, like Oakland Answers, but there is a lot of disappointment over some of the actions of particular elected officials or other government officials, and I think that's where some of the cynicism is coming from, and why people are cocking their eyebrows when we're talking about transparency here today.
We think of it as a double feature. You can come to Open Oakland first and then come to City Council. And every time I have to speak here, it's like 11 at night, so yeah, we hear that, but it's also the most effective night for every regular person, so yeah, it's a tough one. As to the other stuff, I ain't touching that right now.
Adam, did you want to add anything, or should we? No. Well, thank you very much, Steve. I've been so impressed with everybody's attention and participation throughout this meeting. We are moving into our final public comments. I believe that we have 4 speakers lined up, and when they are done, we will be done. So thank you all so much.
And the first speaker is Barbara Newcomb, and my public apologies. This, for some reason, slipped down under the dais, and you had signed up for a public comment at the beginning. I'm so sorry, but please begin with your public comment now.
Good evening. Glad to see you again. I'll make this quick. You need to know that in 1991, a public records management policy was passed and never codified. And we need to get that immediately passed by the City Council, the sooner the better, because in September of this year, it will be 22 years since that was originally proposed and supposedly passed. I would also like to recommend, I think I'm channeling Sanjeev here, that individual citizens need to be involved with this process, and they need to remain involved with this process, something that the League of Women Voters is very good at doing. And so remember that you can get the policy implemented, passed, but if you don't stand around and watch it carefully, it can sort of fade away in the background. That's all I have to say.
Next speaker is John Benton. Oh, he's fine. Catherine Gavsey.
Hi, I guess I should remove this because I'm actually not here speaking officially on behalf of the League of Women Voters, although I want to thank the Commissioner for his very gracious shout out to us earlier. This is just my personal takeaway from the evening. I've been very impressed by the knowledge and the dedication of everyone who's spoken. I was particularly interested in a note at the very end of Mr. Greenway's presentation saying that what was essential to accomplish a goal of transparency and participation was leadership. And he meant specifically, I believe, leadership on the part of elected officials. So we should bear in mind that many, many people in Oakland are used to communicating with their city through their city council member or their city council member's staff and learning about what's happening in the city from their city council member or council member's staff. And unless you have every member of the city council on board with what you want to do, it's going to be very difficult to accomplish it. So I urge that to be kept in mind.
Jen Katz, or Jen Katz.
Thank you for doing this. It's really very encouraging. A number of the speakers tonight talked about trying to get community because we have technology, we're looking for community. I urge them to remember to go where the people are, and that's the libraries. The libraries have been doing outreach, giving information, and they have the computers. So let's not forget about the libraries as a place that you can engage the community. The other things I just want to compliment Code for America. I mean, their Oakland budget actually got me out of so many arguments because every time I just held it up, I didn't have to argue. Now I only hope that they go home and by Thursday they do it for all 6 of them.
That was our final speaker. Well, thank you all so much for being here. As I said at the beginning, this was a hearing. No decision or action is going to be taken. We will meet as a subcommittee, take in all this information, and propose some recommendations to move forward with the full commission. I fully expect all of you to participate in that process and be at our future subcommittee and full commission meetings. And so thank you very much. We are adjourned.
If a member of the public needs parking validated, come out of White New York's public admission now, and our speakers